Evening all. Welcome to the Governance and Audit Committee, 1st of August 2023. I'm Councillor Chris Pearson, Councillor for Beerchurch Ward, and I will be chairing the meeting this evening. Action in the event of emergency. There are no practice alarms planned for this evening, so if the alarm does sound, please evacuate the town hall by going down the main staircase or the back staircase to the High Street, then to the car park behind the town hall in St Runwald Street. This meeting is being held in the grand jury room in the town hall. It is also being broadcast live over the internet, where it can be watched via the council's YouTube channel, where please would speakers use microphones at all times and speak directly into the microphone. Members of the committee may use electronic devices to access their meeting papers, and visitors, the hordes that are here this evening, are welcome to use mobile phones and other devices, including cameras, but please use them discreetly, set them to silent, and do not use voice or camera flash functions. There are toilets on every floor in the building and an induction loop in this room. We may have a short break at 7:30, subject to progress of business. And I will now do introductions or ask for introductions going around the room, starting on my left, please.
Good evening. My name is Andrew Small. I am the Shared 151 Officer with Epping Forest District Council.
Councillors Paul Smith, St Anne's and St John's Ward.
Good evening, Chair. Councillor Dave Harris, Beerchurch Ward.
Councillor William Sunnox, Rural North Ward.
Good evening, Councillor Paul Dundas, Tiptree Ward, and I am substituting for Councillor Sarah Naylor.
Good evening, Councillor Rhys Smithson, Tiptree Ward.
Good evening, Chair. David King, Leader of the Council.
Good evening, Chris Hartgrove, Shared Deputy Section 151 Officer with Epping Forest.
Matthew Evans, Democratic Services Officer.
Thank you. And I can see two people online. Would you like to introduce yourselves?
Hello, I'm Rachel Britton. I'm a director in the Public Sector Assurance team, and I'm here representing BDO this evening.
Welcome, Rachel.
Hello, good evening. I'm Rupal from BDO, and I'm the audit manager.
Welcome. Okay, thank you. Good to see you both. Right, I'll move on then to item 2, substitutions. We've already heard that Councillor Dundas is substituting for Councillor Naylor. We've had apologies from Councillor J, but we don't have a substitute for Councillor J this evening. That takes us on to item 3, urgent items. I'm not aware of any urgent items. Okay, thank you. Item 4, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? I'm seeing shakings of heads, so I'll take that to be a no. Minutes of previous meetings. We have 1 or 2, I believe. We've got draft governance meetings, governance and audit meeting minutes of the 28th of March. Can I take those as an accurate record? Yeah.
Agreed.
Okay, thank you. And draft governance and audit minutes from the 20th of June.
Agreed.
Okay, thank you. Right. Item 6, have your say. There are none. And that takes us neatly then into item 7. I thought I might have to rejig the agenda slightly, but it's good to see you here, Rachel, this evening. So our item 7 is actually the BDO audit status report. And we're all aware of issues around 2021 audit in particular. There is a paper in front of us this evening, and I wonder, Rachel, if I could bring you in at this stage just to take us through or to introduce us to the report that's in front of us.
Thank you, Chair, of course. So as I said, I am part of the public sector audit team, and I am a key audit partner with responsibility for my own portfolio with that team. So just to reassure you that this is my day job, although I have not had any dealings with you so far. I know you were expecting Lisa this evening, so apologies for that, but a situation has arisen which generates a conflict of interest and a threat to her independence. So standard considerations, the safeguard there.
Rachel, could I just ask you to pause for a moment, please? I think we were having a little bit of issue with the sound at this end.
Oh, okay.
So we'll just see if we can fiddle with it a little bit.
Okay.
Right, shall we try again, Robert? Okay, if you'd like to just carry on, and if it's still coming out, I'll come back to you. Thank you.
Okay, so just to say that the safeguard to that independence issue is for Lisa to cease to have any further involvement with the council. So that is why I have been substituted in at short notice. So apologies for that. So the purpose for me being here tonight is just to give you an update of the status of 2021 audit, and also to give you a bit of information about the timeline for the 21-22 and 22-23 audits. As you said, there is a paper that has been provided, so I will take that as read, but I will pull out some key points for you and pause at the appropriate time to take any questions. So in terms of the 2021 audit, as you know, Aphrodite is currently on a career break. However, she has agreed to come back at the appropriate times to enable sign off for your 2021 audit. That's really good news, because that is the most efficient way to get this engagement concluded without duplicating those key audit partner responsibilities. But obviously, in the meantime, if you have any questions or issues, then please feel free to direct them to me, and I can answer those as best I can whilst she is not around. My understanding is that the 2021 audit is well progressed in a number of areas, and we're now just down to enable completion of the audit to a final few sections of the audit that need to be completed, and those are set out on page 4 of the report that you have. I wasn't proposing to go into those in detail, but essentially there are a number of working papers and pieces of information that the council has agreed to provide with us to enable to conclude on those areas, and that information is going to be provided to us by the start of September. Once we have that information, we can look to progress the audit work through September, and I can arrange with Aphrodite dates for her final review and sign off, which will likely be in early October. So I'll pause there for 2021. Any questions you may have on that?
Thank you. I just thought at this stage I would just bring in our Section 151 officer with anything that he may have to say about the report that's in front of us as well, before I open it up to questions and comments. Thank you.
No, actually, I don't have anything to add at this stage, Chair, if I'm honest with you. I mean, I'll update from a council's perspective in the next item on the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, so I'm going to open up to members who may have questions or comments to make about the report that's in front of us. Councillor Sunnox.
Yes, can we go through the missing information and try and understand why it's important? It's listed in section 4. If we could just go through the different items, perhaps starting with the infrastructure information that you need.
Yes, so infrastructure is an area that has been an issue for all councils, and that is due to an issue that was raised last year, and a task and finish group that was proposed, which led to a statutory instrument being issued in December, which gave a solution to that. There was some action that needs to be taken in order for us to assess and perform procedures on those balances within the financial statements. So that will be the council considering the position of those infrastructure assets and things like the useful economic life of those assets, and providing us with their assessment of how those infrastructure assets will sit in the financial statements in relation to that statutory instrument.
And can I ask whether this is just the grossing up of old assets and depreciation, or is there anything important in the accounts that could come from this information in your view?
So the most important part of that consideration is the useful economic lives. That is a judgment and area of estimate. So we have to be comfortable with how the council have defined those useful economic lives, and that also obviously impacts on the depreciation figure that's used, which is potentially a material figure in the financial statements.
Sorry, Rachel, could I ask you just to repeat that? Because I think the sound here was better than when you started, but some of that was a bit difficult to pick up, I'm afraid.
Okay, sure. Yeah, so the main consideration is the useful economic lives, and that is an estimate or a judgment that the council use to determine how to depreciate their assets. So that depreciation figure is an important figure within those financial statements. I don't know if Rupal's got anything to add, because she's dealing with the detail of this.
No, that's exactly it. We're waiting on the working papers, particularly on the useful economic lives.
And will it affect the MRP?
It does have the potential to affect MRP, yes.
Anything else, Councillor Sunnox?
Yes, I just hope we can go through to what the other information that's missing and why you think it's important, so we can get an idea of whether this is a real hold up or whether it's something that we could get over quite easily.
So all of the areas that we've put in this paper are things that we need to conclude the audit. So they will need to be provided to conclude the audit. Rupal's probably got the detail on these things, so I'll hand over to her and she can take you through them one by one.
Thanks, Rachel. So we've also got the financial statements on this list. So we need to have an updated set of financial statements before we can review them. Obviously, if we're auditing a set of financial statements, we need to know what the updated numbers are. So there has been some change to them, so we don't have those updated numbers. And another thing that we're waiting on is the reworked consolidated papers. So workings for the consolidation, again, this is something that we will need. If we're auditing the consolidated adjustments, then we would need the updated adjustments in order to do our work.
Thank you.
And the outstanding value for money assessment work that you're waiting for, is that of importance for signing the accounts?
We would need responses for those value for money questions that we've got.
So the value for money work happens in kind of two stages. The first stage is that we need to be content that there are arrangements in place when we issue the opinion in the financial statements, and whether there is any significant weaknesses in your arrangements. If we do identify any of those, they need to be included in the audit opinion. And the second part of that, which we can issue after the financial statements opinion, is the auditor's annual report, and that contains a detailed commentary around your arrangements for each of those value for money criteria. So it's kind of a two-step process, but there is information we need for the first step.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to move on then to Councillor Smithson's questions and comments next.
Thank you, Chair. Mine's actually just a really simple, practical question. If there are additional queries arising from the information that's still to be provided, what impact will that have on the timetable for delivery?
So with all these things, it depends on the nature and the extent of those queries. If it's simple follow-ups, we have enough time within the time booked in September to deal with those, and that is the nature of audit. We do always expect to have a certain degree of queries. If there is anything significant in there which needs additional work by the council, that may have an impact.
Okay, so if I could just ask a quick follow-up then. Based on what you've seen so far from the other information that's been provided, are you expecting to have significant queries?
I haven't seen anything in relation to infrastructure. So from that list, I would say infrastructure is the potential area where there could be a number of follow-up queries, because we haven't seen that. But I have to say I haven't seen the detail for the council, so I'm not sure whether that, you know, what conversations have already had about that. I don't know if you've got anything to add on that.
Yeah, so the infrastructure assets working paper would be seen by us for the first time. So that, like Rachel says, that could lead to some follow-up queries. We have had a set of workings for the consolidated workings, and we've had some queries and questions, and as a result of them, we're receiving now updated workings. So they're possibly, it depends what we receive. As Rachel says, it does depend what we receive.
Okay, thank you. Can I just at this point ask you, so the things that are in this list, are these things that have been asked of the authority before and provided, but you're now suggesting are a little out of date, or are they things that have been requested before and haven't been provided? Rachel?
Should I?
Yeah, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I can, Rachel, thank you. So the infrastructure assets we requested some time ago and they haven't been provided. The queries on VFM we have requested some time ago and we haven't received responses for all of those queries. In relation to the updated financial statements, we have seen a draft of financial statements, but then again, we're asking for updated based on any adjustments that have been put through. And the workings, the group workings, we have seen a set of those, and we are expecting, just like the financial statements, updates and then the reworked papers to be provided.
Thank you. Councillor Dundas.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening. Just three questions or comments. Firstly, you said that, and I don't want to get into playing sort of a blame game thing between BDO and the council, because that's really not very constructive and isn't going to really help. But just to put in perspective for us, you said you requested this information some time ago. Can you actually say when you requested it, just to give us a little bit of an idea as to how long you have been waiting for it? And I guess my connected question to that is that obviously we pay a fee for the invoice. Has any of this work been invoiced yet? Have we paid anything for the audits yet to be complete to you yet? And thirdly, just a question, danger of paraphrasing Donald Rumsfeld if I'm not careful here. Obviously, since the 1st of April 21, a lot of the known unknowns have become known knowns, which is always the problem when accounts are being done seriously in arrears. Particularly around infrastructure and the valuation of capital assets. To give one example, we're currently dealing with a CIPFA report which recommends putting two of the commercial companies into suspended animation. Now, I don't know if we'll do that, but that clearly has an impact on the consolidated accounts. How do you intend to actually deal with big changes in the 2 years since April 21? Are there going to be notes to the accounts? Are they going to, you know, I'm not that familiar with local authority accounts. I know how they might be dealt with on a conventional business, but perhaps you could give us an idea of how you're going to accommodate what's happened since.
Yeah. So I would assume that it will be similar because these things are driven by accounting and auditing standards. So I think what you're used to is probably similar to what will happen. So we will have to do what we call subsequent event procedures, and we will have to consider any of those big impacts, big changes, and whether they have an adjusting or an unadjusting impact on the financial statements. And that depends on various things about when they happened, the size of those changes, and whether they impact the numbers on the 2021 financial statements. So I think that process will be one that we're going through. I think subsequent events is something that always happens at the end of the audit. So that will be worked through. If there is any adjusting post-balance sheet events, they will need to be recognised in the financial statements. If they are unadjusting post-balance sheet events, it would be a disclosure note.
Okay. Yeah.
And when did you request the information?
So I don't have the exact date, but it was around last autumn.
Okay, thank you.
And in terms of the invoices, what happens is, and this is a working assumption because I haven't looked at what's been billed to you, but what we generally do is bill a proportion of the scale fee once we've completed the planning and interim phase of the audit, and then the remainder is billed after we've issued the opinion. So I would imagine there has been some form of interim payment that's been made, but you won't have paid the full amount.
Right, thank you, Rachel. I've got a couple of other councillors indicating, so I've got Councillor Harris first.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of questions, one or two looking back and one looking forward. The first thing I want to talk about is the national picture that's described in this report. And there's 7 items there that list the things that may or may not have affected the output of the audit. Now, we've all been frustrated, Chair, for a while, and I don't think there's much more this committee and the council could have done with a lot of those on that list. And I think we've done all we could have done to try and get these accounts audited. Notwithstanding that, of course, the questions I want to talk about is whether the national picture, whether there's been any government input, and I don't know if anybody around this table can help with that, if the national picture is as bleak as that, what on earth's going wrong with the audit industry? That's the first thing, because I feel for the auditors, if the situation has changed and the goalposts have all of a sudden become half as narrow as they were, how could you score a goal? So that's the first question. The second thing, of course, I wanted to say really is about assurance. I want to know, because there has been some frustration from you, Chair, and others around this table over the last few months about the delay. What assurance have we got that the deadline on the plan here, the work to complete, the issues to resolve, what assurance can we make sure that not only do we meet those dates on that timeline, but we maybe enhance those and get those done before that? And again, I say, just to be on the clear side, that I don't think the council could have done any more except ask the sort of questions I'm asking now to make sure that we are audited in the correct way at the correct timelines. Those are my questions, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. I'm going to ask Andrew to respond to the first part of the question, and then I'll bring Rachel in for the second. Thank you, Andrew.
So thank you, Chair. The national picture, and I sat through a briefing today. I wonder if Rachel perhaps did as well, really. So the government, Financial Reporting Council, professional bodies are all aware of the issues that are causing a substantial backlog in audited accounts really across local government at the moment. And they are mounting up. So there's a huge backlog of audits one way or the other from multiple years going back to 2015-16, I think, for some councils. And it's got to the point where the government's recognised that it needs some form of intervention to try and resolve the current situation. So the government published a paper a few weeks back, and there was a briefing today, which a number of individuals were invited to. which sets out a set of proposals for addressing this. I think basically, paraphrased, what the government intends to do is issue a set of statutory deadlines for each set of accounts to be completed by. So that these are dates where each of the backlog accounts have to be completed by, and if the auditors can't gain sufficient assurance in that window, then they'll have to certify as qualified accounts, outlining the issues that give rise to the qualification. But it's really just to stop the kind of procrastination, prevarication about, we can't do this, we haven't got the information. Council's not wanting a qualified accounts, of course, and trying to resolve the issues. It's really to just draw a line and say, look, no, it's got to be resolved by this deadline. If it's not, then publish what you've got, and we'll say why we're not happy with it. Now, I think there is some concerns about that, but actually, more than anything else, I'd probably welcome the backlog accounts being resolved and us being able to move forward, and then processes being put in place thereafter to make sure that we don't get back into the situation again, and the accounts are audited in good time thereafter. Really, the Financial Reporting Council, who have been contributory, I suppose, in terms of some of the delays, are on board with this, I think, and the government's going to suggest that the Financial Reporting Council doesn't do as much quality checking perhaps for some of the backlogged accounts, and perhaps reserves their judgment for some of the later sets of accounts. I think overall, I think it will move us forward. I think actually, as I say, although there are issues that probably need to be addressed, I welcome some intervention. So I'm quite keen to see this this process being enacted, but it's not going to be an overnight resolution. There are deadlines running through to the end of, I think, of 2024, really, for the accounts being concluded, the backlogged accounts. But as I say, I think it's a step in the right direction.
Thank you, Andrew. I'll come over to you, Rachel. Just looking at the timetable that's in your report, suggestion is that you're working on an indicative timetable for the audit of 21-22 and 22-23 by the end of August. Yet the report about outstanding issues to be resolved suggests that you need that information by early September. So I'm a little concerned about the crossover of those dates. So if you could just clarify for us, please, what the BDO timetable is for all of this. I think that would help us.
Absolutely. So for 2021, the timeline we have outlined is that for the beginning of September, the council will provide us with the information that we need to conclude the audit. We will do that throughout September and finalise and sign off the audit in October, in accordance with Aphrodite. For 21-22 and 22-23, my understanding is the report says we will give you a timeline by the end of August. So we're not proposing to start any of the financial statements work this month, but given everything that Andrew has said around the information that has come out around the backlog audits in the last 2 weeks, we need to just take stock of that, work out what it means for us and what we need to do, and sort of rejig everything and come back with some proposals about how best to do that and when that would happen.
Thank you. I'm just going to bring Andrew back in before I turn to Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. So although the proposals include backstop dates, I sincerely hope we won't get to that point, if I'm honest with you. It's our intention to bring completed accounts and work with our colleagues at BDO to get to the point whereby we're not threatened by those long stop dates, and I'm sure that there's a desire for financial information much sooner than that anyway, and that's our intention. The next item on the agenda is an update from myself, and I will address some of those points in that section, if that's okay. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Andrew. Yeah, I was just going to remind everyone that we do have a verbal report from Andrew and the chief exec in our next item. So some of the questions, concerns, comments might be better held off until then. I think if we focus just on the BDO audit in this item, and then we'll move to that when we move to the next item. Councillor Smith.
Thank you. Yes, I'd like to take the guidance from you, Chair, on that and leave some issues for the next one. But what I'd like to look at is the issues that we're having regarding the useful life of our assets. That this was information that was only requested last year. I assume this is additional information that's come as a result of some of the difficulties that other councils have encountered, and that quite rightly the auditors are now looking more carefully at some of these areas than they were in the past. Firstly, am I correct so far on my assumptions?
So the infrastructure asset in particular is a national issue, and that has come out through our we have a technical network, so all the firms that provide local government audit services and the NAO and FRC, people like that, they get together and have a technical forum. And a query was raised quite a while ago around the accounting for infrastructure assets. As a result of that, any council with a material infrastructure balance will have had its accounts put on hold whilst an intervention was decided. So there was lots of task and finish groups, lots of conversations, lots of consultations about how we can get to a position that the infrastructure asset balance that we can all live with. And that statutory instrument was only actually released on Christmas Day. So the information, the request for information will have happened because we knew what was going to happen, but actually we couldn't have done anything about it until after that statutory instrument was released. So yeah, it's been one of those ones that has kind of a national picture and there's a long timeline.
Sorry, just to confirm, that's Christmas Day 2022 was when the statutory instrument was raised.
That's right.
So it would have been impossible to have answered the questions prior to that because we didn't know what the statutory instrument was going to require.
So
we had a general idea.
So we knew we had a very good idea of what it was going to be from the level of consultation that had happened, but we just had to wait for that to go through the appropriate processes.
Thank you. That makes it clear. That's why you weren't able to ask for the information any earlier than autumn last year, because you weren't confident what the statutory instrument was going to require. Right. I understand now, because otherwise I was concerned as to why it was taking so long, and I understand the difficulties of dealing with that with some of the instances that we've seen, and I suspect many of you were watching the programme on Thurrock Council last night and some of the issues that have come up from there and some of the other councils which have got themselves into serious financial difficulties. So I understand when that sort of thing is happening, everyone is going to be looked at much more carefully. Thank you. That's cleared things up greatly for me. I appreciate that.
Thank you. I've got an indication from Councillor Dundas again and from Councillor Sunnox. Councillor Dundas.
Thank you, Chair. Just to pick up on that, I mean, talking about last autumn, I mean, I know it's not quite autumn yet, even if it might feel like it, but that's still nearly a year for us to go back, even if we're going back saying these questions are ridiculous, you know, why are you asking them? So I think we do have to be concerned, even if we think back and say, well, there weren't changes till Christmas, that's still 7 months ago. So we do perhaps need to look at ourselves and really ask, why has it taken nearly a year to go back? Well, we haven't gone back on this yet. I don't think we've answered them yet. So it's this whole timetable is on us answering these questions, presumably quite promptly. And that's before we get to 22 and 23, which no doubt will also generate a whole set of questions. My other question is really just regarding the useful life of assets, because we use that method, as I understand it, for calculating our MRP. Now, if we've got, or you disagree with our useful life calculations, and perhaps that number is reduced, then that increases the annual MRP allocated to it, as I understand it. It's simply divided by the useful life. Now, the MRP is charged directly to our revenue budget, as I understand it. Therefore, if we go back and revise the useful life, that affects the MRP, which potentially could turn what was a balanced revenue budget in 21 and 22 into an unbalanced one. So how is that dealt with?
Yeah, absolutely. I think with all these things, the level of materiality comes into play. And as I said, the useful economic life is a judgment. It's an estimate that is used by the council based on their experts and their information. So I think we would have to get to the position where it would be a material issue for it to be amended. Potentially could be an unadjusted error and therefore wouldn't have an impact. But as I say, given these lives and their things, assets like roads and things like that, which can have a big range, as long as we can get comfortable with the judgments and the estimates that the council have made, it shouldn't lead to a material issue.
Okay, Councillor Sunnox.
Yes, I'd like to come back on the issues that you have looked at and that you're happy with. And you say you've done a lot of work. First of all, to clarify, who's the partner who's actually going to sign off these accounts when we get there?
So Aphrodite, who you've been dealing with, will come back and sign those. She has agreed to do that.
And you've been drafted in at short notice without knowledge of our particular accounts to substitute for her today, is that right?
So initially Lisa was going to substitute for Aphrodite, but because of the independence issue, yes, I've been subbed in at short notice. So I apologise, my knowledge is not of the council is not probably as in depth as you would expect.
Well, perhaps my questions could be directed at your colleague, who, to be absolutely honest, we can hear, due to the technology, we can hear an awful lot clearer than you.
Oh, okay.
Do you mind if I do that? So there's about 4 questions here. The first thing is, have you looked at the fixed asset carrying values and are you happy with them? And we have on our balance sheet, we have about 40 million of assets of property, commercial property. I don't know what it is. I haven't seen, we don't see a list of what it is. That's not disclosed to us. But what we do know is that commercial property has taken a massive dive. And I just want to know whether you're happy with the valuations from the work you've done so far, and whether there's any outstanding information you're needing on those.
So in terms of outstanding information, there isn't any. That section, there are various sections that are under review or are being reviewed. As I'm sure you can appreciate, it's been some time since we have worked on this file. So I don't feel comfortable just going through and definitively saying, yes, that section is closed off. There was an update provided based on each of the financial sections that we've got in the file, as to what stage it was, whether we're still working. There are still sections that we are working on where we've received information. We're waiting on receipt of everything before we can book resource in order to complete the sections that we have mentioned where we're missing information, but also to pick up the sections where we have received information in bits and pieces. So we haven't been working through things where information has been provided in piecemeal. We're waiting to receive everything before we are able to book a resource who can pick up and then take everything to completion.
Okay. And then going on, have you looked at the Northern Gateway leases and looked at the accounting treatment of those, which I think is in finance lease territory? And are we going to have to be putting that 65 odd million of debt onto our balance sheet?
As I said, the file is in various stages of completion. Sections are just to be finished off, or sections are to be reviewed. They have been manager reviewed. There are certain review points that need to be cleared. So I don't at the moment feel comfortable, having not prepared a detailed briefing on each of these detailed questions that have been asked. I don't feel comfortable providing those answers at this stage.
Okay.
Thank you. Can I just interject here? Because I think we also need to be mindful that we're talking about the 21-22 accounts, not necessarily the current value of anything. So it is a bit of a mishmash, isn't it? I'll allow you to carry on, Councillor Summers.
I suspect the answer is going to be the same again. The last question you'll be pleased to hear, and I suspect I know the answer. The reserve accounting, it's incredibly complex, and I can't follow it. Just so you know, I'm a chartered accountant of 40 years standing. I cannot follow the reserve accounting. There's huge great adjustments. The reserve, the statutory accounts bear no resemblance to the management accounts that we're reported to us regularly. Have you looked at the reserve movements, and are you happy with them?
I don't feel comfortable at this point just concluding on anything. I'm really sorry, I can't give you those detailed answers, but we have provided the council with a detailed listing of where each section is. So that is with the council.
And I think just to reassure you that we do have standard procedures for all of those adjustments that go through. So if the work has been completed and reviewed, they will have been looked at.
Thank you, Rachel. I'm just going to bring Andrew in at this point.
I don't think I've got all the answers to those questions, if I'm honest with you, but it is worth remembering that we are talking about 2021 accounts at the moment. So, certainly the valuation issues and some of them are more, perhaps some of the issues you're referring to in terms of valuation are more recent than that, but it depends upon which time frame you're referring to, of course. And in terms of reserve movements, I mean, there are a number, it's a quirk, I think, of local government accounts, and there are certain transactions that have to go through accounts which aren't cash transactions and never hit the revenue account, and some of those are around pensions and the valuation methodology used for pension accounting, which can, and often actually means tens of millions of pounds shift each year in terms of pension valuations. And there are some other large valuations, large changes in capital finance reserves as well that also, again, they don't hit the revenue account, but certainly provide an explanation as to why there are large movements between the statutory accounts and the management accounts. I mean, I expect we'll go into that in more detail as we consider those detailed entries when the council presented in full.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think I referred to the 21-22 accounts. So 2021, we're even earlier than that, aren't we? Right, I've got Councillor Smith and then Councillor Smithson, and then I think we've probably had enough at this stage on the audit of the 2021 accounts. Councillor Smith.
Yes, I was just picking up on Councillor Dunst's point about potential changes to the MMRP and the provisions there. Of course, the MMRP, though, is just a bookkeeping entry between our revenue accounts and our reserves to reflect it. It doesn't actually result in real money leaving the council, does it?
Andrew.
I think, Chair, actually MRP is one of those transactions that does hit the revenue account actually, and so is relevant. So
it hits the revenue account in the year it's concerned, but then you transfer it.
It's a provision for depreciation in the private sector.
Indeed.
Really. So yes, it's a cost. You have to provide for it. It's a cost in your revenue budget to pay for the cost of borrowing over time.
It gets credited to our reserves.
From where it can be applied against future debt repayment.
Okay. Final contribution from around the table this evening. Councillor Smithson.
Thank you, Chair. I think our colleagues at BDO are looking for the phrase they'd like to exercise their right under the Fifth Amendment. There was some talk about sections with various statuses. I think the committee would find it helpful to have a list of the sections and showing the current status. Are we waiting for information? Are they manager reviewed? Are they still have outstanding queries, etc.? Would it be possible to have that by the end of the month so that we know when we hit September where we're at, what we've still got left to do?
So one was provided. I actually I don't know when it was, but I can dig through my emails and let someone from the council know. But if there's been no change to that status, so we've been working through NHS, and so there's been no change. So there's not been any resource booked since that update has been provided. So that is the current status. If the council does have the email addresses of the councillors who want that information, then I'm happy for that to be circulated if the council want to do that.
Thank you. Yeah, I think there are enough queries, concerns about the timetable that's in front of us this evening that we'd all like an update, wouldn't we, about where we're at. If not the end of August, certainly looking at the request for information by early September. Yeah, I don't want it to stretch. I see Councillor Smithson looking for an even bigger fish. But yeah, I think it would be useful for committee members to have just a brief update via email by perhaps the second week of September as to whether or not we are on course in accordance with the document that's in front of us this evening. I think what this is showing everyone is that if we don't have audits carried out in a timely fashion, we do end up in a bit of a mess, don't we? We're trying to compare some almost rotten apples now with some oranges that are very different in the current climate. So it's not going to be straightforward dealing with these audited accounts and the audited accounts for the following year or two. Hopefully we will be back on track before too long. I'd just like to say to the two of you, thank you very much for your contribution this evening. I know, Rachel, in particular, that you've been the substitute for the substitute, so well done. And thank you both. Whoop, have we lost them?
No, I'm still here.
Still here.
Apologies, well, we lost the pitch, so you're still there, you can still hear us, that's good. So thank you very much both. No doubt we'll have you back in front of this committee before the end of the year. We have one or two meetings planned, and we'll review our work schedule at the end of tonight's meeting anyway. So thank you both, and we'll let you get on with the rest of your evening now.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. So we were asked in the agenda this evening to consider and comment upon the BDO audit status report, including proposals contained therein. I think we've done that. But I think it's important to recognise that there's a need for this to come back to us as soon as we know where we're at in terms of the timetable for delivering the final audit. All agreed on that? Yeah. So I think now it makes sense for us to move on to item 8, verbal update from Andrew, but also our chief exec has asked to be involved in this item as well. So I invite Pam just to join us around the table. Just to say that I know that there was this webinar this morning because I was invited and I sat in on that as well. So no doubt Pam and Andrew will update us on where what that was saying to us, and also where we know and believe we are at as a local authority, Colchester City Council. So I'm going to invite Pam first of all, and then I'll bring Andrew in after Pam's made her comments, and then bring councillors in. Pam, over to you, please.
Thank you, Chair. So I would like to make a number of quite general points as a precursor to what I know will be a bit more detail from Andrew. But I think this evening's debate so far has persuaded us all that we're dealing with an extremely serious matter here. and it is of an unprecedented nature, creating really high levels of complexity, which we are trying to navigate. I think it's also important that I say personally how important and significant I think this issue is, and how seriously it's taken by our Section 151 and his deputy and the whole cabinet. And I recognise that there have been some delays, certainly in the context of the provision of information from CCC. There are a number of reasons for that, which I'm not planning to go into this evening unless questions specifically on that. But we are looking at ourselves. I think that was Councillor Dundas's challenge. Are we looking at ourselves? And the answer is we are. We are looking at ourselves with a very bright spotlight. And as a result of that, that's creating even more delay. But there's a wider context and challenge which has been well described this evening. But we now need to look to the future. And there are a number of points I'd like to make. I won't take too much of your time. I think the first thing to say is about the skills we now have accessible to us. We have the right resources and the right leadership in the form of Andrew Small and Chris Hartgrove. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank them both for their diligent, painstaking work, which is giving us the opportunity to really understand where we are. We also, through the shared arrangement we have with Epping, have access to even more resource, some of which we are already utilising, and that's proving to be extremely helpful. We now have a little bit more clarity about the outstanding information and the time frame that we're now operating within. And following this morning's webinar, which Andrew and I both attended, and other documents that have been forthcoming from government, we now have a clearer framework from government in which we can now operate. And I may say also, in relation to the previous presentation, I think we have more engaged auditors now who recognise the scale of the problem and what needs to be done to resolve it, and a sense of determination to do so. My last couple of points are about our collective determination as a senior leadership board to get us on the right footing, even if that takes more time. And that's a really difficult message to give when everyone in this room and beyond is anxious for detail. But I would rather give accurate, up-to-date and transparent information which provides the council with the ability to make quality decisions in the future about what we do and what we don't do. So I would ask you to give us even more patience as we try to protect the financial position of the council and the reputation of the council. And that's a difficult thing to ask because we have been very patient. However, we are on the right track. We are gradually rebuilding the financial information so that we can get to a point where we can provide assurance, which after all is my job. So thank you for that. I would like to hand over now to Andrew and to ask him to take us through some of the detail. Thank you.
Thank you, Pam, for that introduction. Just before I bring Andrew in, I just wanted to say, Councillor Dundas, you'll remember when I last chaired this committee, how 11th hour we were in getting accounts signed off by the auditors. I remember signing one lot off on the day of deadline, but another, the subsequent lot, it was November time when they were finally signed off. So this isn't anything new. This is something that has been going on as a national issue and a local issue for a number of years now. But I think the most important thing is, as Pam's just suggested to us, is that we have a clear understanding now of what the financial picture is within the authority at this moment in time. And that is very much down to the direction that the Chief Executive is giving to the senior leadership team and to the council officers as a whole, and also our introduction of our new Section 151 officer and deputy, who I think have brought, I have no concerns about our previous Section 151 officer. However, they have brought fresh pairs of eyes, which I think is not a negative thing in the current climate, knowing that we haven't had our accounts properly audited because of issues with the auditors. So at this point, I'll bring Andrew in.
Thank you, Chair. Where to start, I think, really. I realise that the kind of incoming that there's an awful lot of expectation on finance right now in terms of clarifying the overall financial position of the organisation. Really, I'm also aware that you know, as incoming with Mr. Hargrove, really, there's a period of delay as we reach our own understanding of the current position, really, and the gaps and what needs to be done and so on. And there's a little bit of a hiatus around that, which I suppose I'm responsible for, really. So you know, I realise we've added delay in the organisation getting to a point where it's clear about its own financial situation. But it is, you know, it's a learning curve for us, and we are making progress, I think, in terms of our understanding. The national position can't be understated in terms of, you know, the complexity, the delay, the issues, really. Colchester's not alone in the current situation. There are a number of councils with accounts going back to 2015-16 which haven't been audited at this point in time. For a variety of reasons, I suppose, really. Some, you know, there's some work that the organisation needs to do. There's some work that there are some delays in the national position. Infrastructure assets were mentioned earlier that have been contributory into the current position, but all of which isn't really a substitute for the organisation needing to know where it is financially at this point in time, and that's our priority, I think, is to get to the point where we can give the wider membership of the council reassurance about its financial position. That said, and I echo, I suppose, the Chair's points about I'm not sat here with significant financial concerns about the organisation's health, if I'm honest with you. I believe that the previous Section 151 officer was very cautious and very prudent, and I'm not sat here believing there's a black hole in the council's accounts, but I do understand that the delays in publishing financial information might give concern to some that that's the situation. So our job, I think, or our priority is to try and give that council the greatest reassurance that we can at the earliest possible point. So I'll just go through, you know, my understanding, I think, of where we are in respect of the years that are still subject, the years that need to be concluded and accounts published for. So 2021, as we've discussed at some length already, are published, but not yet audited. As our colleagues at BDO said, they are waiting some outstanding information. That is a priority of ours, is to get that information to them by early September. I hear that the committee's desire to understand a bit more detail around that, and we will work to try and provide that reassurance. With the intention the audit fieldwork recommence early October, and I hope that we'll get to a conclusion not too long after that. I'm not aware that there are big gaps in the accounts, and the infrastructure assets piece isn't a massive value assets, you know, it's not massive for value of assets, but it's still, I suppose, significant in the accounts and does need to be concluded. So we'll work through that one, and we'll give the missing information to the auditors, and hope that you know, we'll have a dialogue with the auditors and reach a conclusion thereafter. 21-22 is probably, there's more work required for that one. You'll be aware there were a partial set of accounts published for 21-22, of which we've inherited, and we're working to try and complete the gaps and to publish that set of accounts at the earliest opportunity. I would say that I was asked by the leader for an indicative timetable to conclude that, and I offered a tentative mid-August date for that one, but did stress that there are, that was a challenge, I think, really, and probably would be proven to be the case as well. I would say that the finance team has been hit by some sickness in some of the key individuals in the last few weeks, and some of the key individuals that we need have been off for a number of weeks now, which will inevitably and regrettably,
That's £20 in the mayor's fund.
it will, unavoidably, I'm afraid, delay our getting to a published set of accounts for 21-22. There are some positives though. We have brought in some of our technical staff from Epping to assist with getting to the bottom of some of the canon transactions, really. And that's been quite useful from our point of view in terms of informing us and helping us to understand the position as well. We've also gone to the market to get some interim resource in as well, to specialist final accounts resource, which it's been a struggle. It is a struggle for many councils still trying to conclude their accounts one way or the other. But Mr. Hartgrove appointed somebody yesterday, I think it was, who he and colleagues from Epping are very pleased about. I think exactly the right level of resource that we require to help us move through this, and with stacks of experience as well, and can hit the ground running. So the good news is they can start on site on Monday as well. So that's good news from our point of view, really. And their first job will be to review the position and work out the way forward from there, really. I understand there'll be pressure for a date or an indication of a date as to when we can present to the council that set of accounts for 21-22. Without being too specific, I would say sometime in September. You can press me on that, but I'm conscious they have to be right. First and foremost, they have to be right, and we understand the priority and the drive from the organisation to get to that point at the earliest opportunity, and we'll put all the effort and resource that we can into to get to that point. But I don't want to overpromise, really, if I'm honest with you. I'd so much rather be able to present a set of accounts in front of you that we were confident in, really, and robust and withstand the challenge that this committee will provide. On to 22-23, so I think a lot of good progress has been made in that space, if I'm honest with you. We have now struck a provisional outturn position for 22-23, and I can tell the committee that is looking like a balanced position or a small underspend for last year. So I think that that again adds to that reassurance that there's not some sort of fundamental problem in the accounts. As has been pointed out, but it does depend to an extent on concluding 21-22's accounts, because valuation of assets MRP will be a consideration. We think it's pretty close to the right number, but I can't give you that categorical assurance until we completed that work, if I'm honest with you. So I'm not expecting a large variance to come out of that, but I should flag the potential for that to be the case. For a variance, not a large variance. As I say, we've got some new interim resource in. There's some other resource that we've brought in as well to try and bolster the team to get to a conclusion at the earliest possible opportunity. And we will keep members informed about our progress in terms of getting to a conclusion and publishing draft accounts 22-23. We think it's likely to be in October at this point in time. So hopefully the committee will find itself with a lot of financial information in a fairly short order, really, in the grand scheme of things, in October to at least get us up to date in terms of draft accounts from the council. Given where we've will only be in post for 6 months at that point in time, I think that's quite an achievement, really, if I'm honest with you. So, but there is still quite a lot of work to do, as I say, really. But as I've given the commitment to the committee, we understand the organisation's desire to get to that point at the earliest opportunity. We're working flat out to make sure that we do. I've already updated the committee on the work of the government's consultation on getting to a conclusion on outstanding audits, so I don't need to repeat that in this section of the agenda. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Andrew. comprehensive, helpful with time frames. I was listening to that webinar this morning as well. Just one word of caution I took from that, and that was that the time frames that were being suggested to everybody who was on that were not written in stone. They were due to go back to Minister for approval, but also they were subject to some consultation with local authorities. So it's not quite as clear cut, but I'm reasonably reassured by Andrew's comments about our own position and his view of our own position at this particular time. I've got Pam who want to come back in, and I've got Councillor Smith who's indicated. I've got Councillor Harrison, Councillor Dundas and Councillor Smithson. So Pam, over to you, please.
Thank you, Chair, for letting me just make some concluding remarks before the questions start. First of all, I just wanted to emphasise the context of risk in which we're operating, and I know we're going to discuss that in the next item when we review the strategic risk register, and in the context of that, why I support and uphold Andrew's determination to proceed with extreme caution. I don't think we should be embarrassed about doing that. I think it's absolutely appropriate that we do. And secondly, because of the focus work we're doing, I think delay and the inevitable delay that Andrew has described brings with it clarity, and that's worth waiting for, because that will enable us, as I said earlier, to proceed with much better quality decision making about the future of the council. And my last point is that I do hope the indication on the out-term position does give this committee some confidence, and that confidence should be about our commitment and absolute determination to manage our finances prudently and with caution, particularly given that risk environment I've referred to. Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. I think you make a very valid point about having a slight delay to ensure, but I know you will be aware that whenever I am in a meeting with you, I am always asking for a time frame as well, because I don't want, I noted Councillor Smithson's stretching, and I'm always the same. I'm always looking for an end date, or at least a very close to an end date for when we're making projections about where we're at. Councillor Smith, I have you first.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I too take a great deal of comfort in the views from a newly appointed Section 151 officer that they are happy with the general conduct of the accounts and that there are no glaring black holes or anything like that to be found in them, and also indeed confidence in the fact that the position for the last year is also looking much more favourable than many of us expected, given the economic problems that we've seen the last year with the rise in energy prices and the cost of living, the wage rises that took place during the year as well. So I'm very encouraged with all that. I am going to press though a bit more on the asset register and the valuations of the assets. I would like to understand why, when they were requested back in autumn last year, they've still not been produced, because surely there shouldn't be too much of a problem in identifying what the assets are and getting a rough estimate of what their actual life is. So I would like to ask some more information on that, please.
Andrew, can I bring you on it here?
I will try, and I might ask my colleague, Mr. Hargrove, to add to that. My understanding from what BDO was saying was that was in relation to infrastructure assets. Yes. So there has been a national issue about infrastructure assets and the valuation of infrastructure assets, which has held up most councils' accounts, if I'm honest with you, depending upon the significance of balance of infrastructure assets held within those accounts. So it couldn't have been resolved, I don't think, until the conclusion was issued, and as I say, I think she's Christmas Day, 2022. So we've been waiting on that, but there has still been a delay subsequent to that. That's partly to do with the handover, I think, of the finance function to ourselves, really, and some of our getting into the bottom of where we are and moving forward. But so that's probably contributory.
Chris, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, just to sort of answer this question in sort of general terms, I think it's worth sort of sharing the experience that we've had at Epping, which I believe is typical nationally. And what's been going on is we've had slight delays in terms of the audit, where there's been question marks around infrastructure assets, for example, and other valuations. And that's resulted in the auditors effectively going off to do other things and say, we'll come back while you answer those questions. And the actual availability of audit resources is not always aligned with the availability of staff resources. So for Epping, for example, the auditors wanted to audit the previous year's accounts when we were preparing the 22-23 accounts. It was simply mission impossible to answer audit queries for a spell of about 6 weeks or so. So the planets are not really aligned in terms of resources, and that's happening across the board nationally. And I suspect, although I wasn't around at the time, I suspect that's a major part of it. And indeed, the audit manager in the discussion earlier on mentioned the fact that they didn't want to deal with queries that were answered in a piecemeal fashion. They're basically storing them up and coming back and dealing with them all at once. So it's a bit of both, probably. I suspect delay on both parts. That would be my assessment. I suspect.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Bob?
Can I just press, how confident are we that we will be responding to the auditors with the information that they've requested on the infrastructure assets in the timescale that's been indicated?
Well, it's a high priority. The difficulty that we've got to hit the specific difficulty here, we've been hit by sickness in terms of the finance team, as Mr. Small alluded to, and that hits that particular query sort of nail on the head, if you like. And that very much, the short-term timing of it depends on whether the individual or returns to work or not. It might add a delay of an extra couple of weeks, perhaps, if they don't, because we have got professional resources that are coming in to address that, are well capable of doing that, but clearly it will probably add a couple of weeks delay to it, but it's not a major barrier, that timetable.
I'm just concerned that if we are delaying giving that information to the auditors, they might go and do something else rather than finalise our accounts, given the backlog.
I share your concerns, but to be fair, they have built a contingency in there. So in their report, they basically said if you submit the information by early September, then we'll audit it in October. So there is a cushion of about a month in there.
Andrew.
Thank you, Chair. We will keep a dialogue up with the auditors as well. Really. I think that's important to make sure that they are aware where we are, where our issues are, and they are kept appraised of timetables as well, so that they can manage their resources as best as they can.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Harris next.
Thank you, Chair. That was on that very subject, so how apt. On the dialogue, going forward, you've just given us some assurance and reassurance that will continue with the resource, etc. I just want to understand, looking backwards, as it were, over the last umpteen months, whether that dialogue has ever stalled at any time, or whether we know it's stalled at any time for any reason with BDO or ourselves along that timeline, as to make sure whether the pace, the content and the style of the dialogue was apt for that particular time. So that's the question I had, really.
Andrew?
Thank you, Joe. If I'm honest, I'm not sure I can really comment on that one, really. I mean, there have been issues across the audit sector, across all firms, across all of local government. But as to the reasons for those, I'm not really sure that I can give a Colchester-specific response to that one.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. And I suppose we have to be mindful of the fact that neither you nor Chris were here at that time. Pam, I know you've indicated, so you may have some information.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So I can confirm that that dialogue very much stalled at various stages in the process, and that experience was shared by our neighbouring authorities, which is why I made the point earlier that I'm encouraged by the renewed sense of commitment from the auditors, which quite frankly I'm sure has been driven by government directives and intervention, but I don't really care how it came about, as long as we get that more engaged dialogue going forward. But there is absolutely no doubt in my mind that the scarcity of the right skills and the availability of those skills to local authorities such as Colchester has been a factor, as has the difficulty also experienced by our professional auditors. And this constant stream of new people being involved in the process hasn't helped. Thank you.
Thanks, Pam. And I know we had an indication, and I'm aware that nobody from BDO is available any longer. So I don't want to cast any aspersions, but it was made clear during that briefing with us this evening that they've had more than one person substituting for another person, and that obviously hasn't assisted with the process. Right, I have Councillor Dundas, then Smiths and then Sunnox. Councillor Dundas.
Thank you, Chair. Well, firstly to Chris and Andrew, welcome. We hope we see you again, that you're not to run away after tonight. Just to pick up on something the Chair said, yeah, I mean, I do feel a little bit, this is where I came in. I remember sitting here in 2019 when I think BDO just came in as our auditors, because I can't remember who we had before, but I don't think we were very happy with them, so we were delighted to see BDO. So it's funny how things turn out. I think we've spoken a lot about the asset values being one of the missing pieces of information, but I just really wanted to pick up on what practical effect that has, because I mean it has an effect on delivering the audited accounts. But I think it was either in a seminar or somewhere written. I think it was down at the LGA conference, which I know Andrew was at, where the sort of question was asked, well, you know, what does the book value of the A6 have on my ability to deliver services as a leader of the council? And I guess the question is, what does the book value of St Mary's car park, what effect does that have on us actually being able to cut grass? And perhaps the answer is it's an important accounting factor, but we're not, we don't need a big balance sheet to go and convince the bank to continue our overdraft, or at least I hope we don't as a local authority. And we haven't got shareholders to keep happy. So unless we're actually planning to sell the business, which I don't know, perhaps that might be a way out. You know, how much does it actually matter, I guess, is my first question. My other question is, we've spoken about MRP, and I don't want to labour the point, but it is important, because if you look at what's happened with some local authorities which have struggled financially, and I just want to be clear, I don't want to put Colchester into the category of some names we should mention. I'm just using it to make a point, so don't put words in my mouth. But where they've got into trouble, it's not because they've messed up their revenue spending, their day-to-day budget. It's where they've messed up the capital budget, and through losses and through MRP, that has had such a big impact on their revenue budget, they've been unable to continue with a lot of services. Certainly, I think Woking was one, to give a good example, where their MRP was more than their entire revenue budget. So it does matter in the sense that we are a council which has a relatively high capital budget compared to our revenue budget, albeit a fair chunk funded by various grants or whatever. So I just think it's something we need to keep an eye on, because that MRP can start out at 250 and 1,000, we think was not too much, and it creeps up over the years, and suddenly you're having $1 million taken out of your spending power, or 2 million per year, and you haven't really noticed it happening. So perhaps in reports, what I've never seen is really a breakdown of how our MRP is derived and where we think that's going really in future years. And I think that will link in very suitably to the capital review going on, because there are probably one or two capital programs we've spoken about in the past, particularly around house building, which we might not be able to finance because of the MRP impact. I know there's a lot of talk about this a few years ago. So in future reports, at some point, could we see a breakdown of how our MRP is derived and link it to actual projects? I think it might be helpful.
Thank you, Councillor Dundas. I think it's appropriate, I was going to raise this later on in the agenda, but I think it's appropriate for me to say at this point that we spoke at our first meeting about the need to have raised awareness of local authority finances, not only around this table, but generally within the members group. Now, I know you will recall that when I chaired this committee some years ago, we did actually have an event of similar status. Yeah. I think, if I remember rightly, there was one additional to the members of the committee who turned up to that, but nevertheless we did. And I've been saying that I think we need to have that again. I've spoken with our Democratic Services Officer, I've spoken with our Chief Executive about this, and I've also spoken with our Section 151 Officer about us doing that. And I think that could include some of the questions that we have this evening to ensure that we're all familiar with how that works in the context of Colchester City Council's finances. So I'll ensure that we have something clearly in the minutes tonight before we go around that. I'll just come back because I know, Pam, you wanted to come in on something. Andrew, I think you were indicating, and I'll also bring Chris and Councillor King in at this point. Pam, first.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to address Councillor Dunst's question head on about whether the value and contribution of our assets matters. It does matter. It's of the most critical importance, and that's been identified at a number of points. So if we go back to the peer review last September, it was a key action in the 8-point action plan that we were left to take forward. We had the return visit of the peer review team last week, who described our progress as impressive. However, that doesn't leave any room for complacency, because it's clear from this evening there's an awful lot of work to do. But we grabbed this issue of our capital programme and the need to review it extremely quickly, and we take it very seriously. Such is the case that CIPFA were commissioned to undertake a wholesale review of our assets, and I would encourage all members to attend the member briefing on Thursday evening at 6 o'clock, so that you can hear from CIPFA, a highly respected professional body, about how we're doing. I hope that first set of understandings that will come from that report will allow us then to enter into what is going to be a very laborious process, and that is the line-by-line review of the value of each of our assets and the associated appraisals that need to take place. That will then enable the Cabinet to take decisions about the future size of our capital programme and the implications for our revenue budget. So again, painstaking and for some, too slow a process, but needs to be undertaken so that we have that understanding in order to set our finances on the right track going forward and see what's affordable. That affordability issue is critical because absolutely everything's changed since COVID and since the most recent financial fluctuations. So please take that note down about when the briefing is. There will be further briefings, but that's a good starting point, I think, for understanding what we're doing and why we're doing it with regard to our capital assets.
Thank you, Pam. And just before I bring you in, Chris, I would say, having sat in on a CIPFA briefing just a couple of weeks back, I was much happier and much clearer about where we were at when I sat through that meeting. So I hope that people will attend that briefing and feel more comfortable about our position. Still a long way to go, but I think I do feel more comfortable having sat through the initial briefing. Chris.
Yeah, just a couple of comments really. I mean, you talked about the value of the assets and whether it matters, and which is quite a good analogy for some of the technical accounting adjustments that are required to be made under the accounting standards. Now, some of them they matter for accounting purposes and compliance, but is it real cash? In some cases, no, and it's extremely difficult. It's extremely complex for the non-initiated to actually follow what's going on, and that's something that's been picked up in the Redmond review, and in fact Councillor Sonic sort of touched upon the similar areas, the difference between the management accounts and the statutory accounts in terms of the reserve movements. That's another example of it playing out. With regards to MRP, I mean, your comments are noted around the transparency on MRP. Rest assured, that is absolutely in the crosshairs of what we're looking at the moment. That is absolutely a key consideration. So I look forward to presenting that in the future.
Thank you, Chris. Councillor King.
Thank you very much, Chair. It's very interesting to hear both a BDO, who clearly have nothing much to do with the problems we've got now, or our own conversation, which can very understandably focus upon what we need to do, and actually have to bear in mind that context. The reason why we are having these conversations so late in the day is because we've not been able to get there earlier. And we can talk about the issues of resource and focus, and I think that's entirely appropriate, which I'll get to in a moment. But I just want to sort of remind us all, just to bear in mind that the national challenge, and then frankly the challenge of our particular auditor, is the largest part of why we are talking about all of this so late in the day. It's completely unacceptable. I too was in this briefing and hearing them talk about, oh, there'll be an end date and we'll soften it all off, and we're actually just transferring a problem forward. We've got to get this cleared, we've got to get sorted. I noticed their date was March. The national date is the end of March, so there's not a lot of margin between their promise and the insistence by government of what's got to be done, but that's to one side. I wanted to give the kind of political piece here, which I know Paul, as a former leader, you will understand, as does the other Paul. All of you have had executive roles one way or another in this council. So I want to be really clear about this. I've said it repeatedly. I want to say it again because we're in a public place, aren't we? Which is that we're completely committed to what's been outlined by the Chief Executive and the Section 151 officer and deputy. Shared or not, you're ours. And that's to ensure that every stone that needs to be overturned is being overturned. It's really important when there is public doubt about how government works and how local government is failing in some respects to balance the books for whatever set of, I've enjoyed Thoric in part, but not what it says about local government finances and the relationship with the political class is supposed to ensure there's scrutiny. We are doing this the right way. I'm grateful, William, to you and Paul and Reese and Paul and others who ensure there is challenge here, but I just want to give an absolute assurance, I hope we don't need to, but it's right for the public arena, that what the Cabinet are doing, what I am doing, is ensuring that we have explicit focus. We ask the questions around resource and enablement, and I hear back, of course, the responses about what that means in terms of time and patience. And although I have to sort of hard dissect it, absolutely, because you need the time, the team need the time to make sure they do that thorough job, which will give us the absolute assurance. I'm really grateful to hear said out loud publicly that from all you see and all you've been through, as best we can tell, including the last financial year, that we are in a challenging but sound position. Those are my words, but that's how I translate what I'm hearing. And we should be appreciative of that difficult fact, although it's not the end of clarity, but it's at least the start of it. There is something extra too about the last parts of the conversation. Thank you for recognising MRP. These relationships we have to make sure are understood. And I've had this brief conversation with our Section 151 officer, and I know we're on the same ground, which is it's not good enough to be clear enough for those who understand the intricacies of public finances and accounting, if they can understand. We've got to have a step change in the way in which we ensure there is an understanding by members and the interested public about the things that matter most. So to the extent that time allows, is to ensure our Section 151 officer duo and all the team and resourcing bring to bear is kept to task if they can do so for us. It's to say that all we do is then has to be translated into a clarity that enables a quality discussion by those without accountancy backgrounds. The average member, if I can use that phrase, with different backgrounds. So that's where we're heading to. So it's not just of the moment, but it's going to be a clarity and expression of the future accounts, which will make for a better quality, confidence and assurance. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. Councillor Dundas, is there anything?
No, thank you. Thank you very much for highlighting the MRP. That would be really useful. And I just wanted to say that, you know, we do, well, certainly I understand, and I think I probably speak for the other members of the committee, we do realise that you're coming into this, you haven't been here that long, and we do understand that you are doing your utmost to get up to speed, and it can't be easy. So we actually do want to try and support you. We're still going to ask the difficult questions. We're not going to stop doing that. But hopefully we can also be supportive in your endeavours as well.
Thank you. And I think they're not difficult questions, they're challenging and constructive is how I would describe. Pam.
Thank you, Chair. I suspect you want to take a break, but before we do, I just want to respond briefly to what Councillor King said. First of all, I feel fully supported by the Leader and the Cabinet in turning over every single stone that needs to be turned over and dealing with the consequences of that, that's important to say. But there's a couple of examples, I think, that might give you a sense of how seriously we're taking the overall financial situation, the current in-year challenge, and the commitment we have to resolve it. The first one is the recruitment freeze. So we have a recruitment freeze in place, and the reason for that is to make sure there is momentum around the drive to deliver £500,000 of staff savings this year. So £500,000 of the £5 million that we need to find this year is in staffing. Now, if you take that in the context of everything we've said about staff shortages, skill shortages, both for us, the wider public sector and BDO, you'll know how challenging that is. And I've taken personal responsibility for looking at every single vacancy. That's not a position any chief executive wants to be in. But until I can see the traction on the delivery of those £500,000 worth of savings, that will remain. And we have a very clear process that we expect our senior managers to go through before any vacancy hits my desk. And the second is a small, but I think an important symbol of the leadership that the senior leadership board is illustrating. And that is a decision. Again, I don't ever remember it being taken before, that the senior leadership team, in the face of a difficult set of discussions with Unison, will take a pay freeze. Now, some will say, well, what does that really mean in terms of the pay? We're working that through at the moment. I think it's absolutely vital that the senior leadership team of this council enters into those discussions with Unison that will be challenging, given the allowance we've made for pay in our budget, which is all we can afford. So that has its challenges in its own right. I just wanted to give you two quite operational issues as an example of the commitment that we're showing to getting this council on the right financial footing. Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. I know these are not the easiest of times in all sorts of respects, are they? I'm conscious of the time. It's very rare that this committee needs a break, because it's very rare we go on this long. But my view is that I've got two further speakers, and my suggestion is that I take those two so that we can wrap this item up and then have our break. I have Councillor Smithson and Councillor Sunnock still, so Councillor Smithson.
Thank you, Chair. Perhaps the CEO could spare a thought for the CFO at British Telecom, who, when I was there in 2015, did exactly the same thing and went through a process of approving every single vacancy in an organisation of 87,000 people. I think you're getting off lightly at the moment. When I indicated I had 1 point, I now have three, and I'll try and keep them as quickly as I can. The first is a point of information and maybe a little grumbling on my part. The SIPFA briefing that has been organised for Thursday evening once again clashes with a Colchester Borough Homes board meeting, which CBH are presenting their annual report and governance statement at the next meeting here. So we now have a situation where 3 members and the new portfolio holder for housing have to choose between CBH and a member briefing. Can we please do more to make sure that we schedule these properly, because it's not the first time it's happened. The second point, I'm just listening to all the new things that need to come before this committee, and I'm looking at the work plan with absolute horror. I know we were going to put an extra meeting in December. I think we might need 2 or 3. There are some really meaty things that have got to come back. So I think we do need to look at the work plan very, very seriously, or at least try and take some of the review items offline and do them remotely if we can somehow, get them circulated in advance, do some advanced reading, just so that we can turn up pretty informed and crack through some of these items. And then the last thing is a question for our new section 151 officer and his deputy. Welcome, thank you for everything you're doing. I really appreciate what you're saying. I have a question regarding the well-being of the finance team. You've mentioned sickness a couple of times. I am assuming that they are up against it. Generally, how are they coping? And what more can the leadership team and the members do to make sure that their well-being is okay?
Thank you, Councillor Smithson. Just going to come back to your point about the SIPFA briefing. I think is a valid one, and in fact not one that hasn't been raised previously about ensuring. But I think it's fair to say that the response has been that the officers are holding ever more briefings with members, which is right, because it means that we are included in more, we're more up to speed with things that we should be. But your point is well made. So, and I noticed that Pam was quickly scribbling that down, so I'm sure she'll take that one away. With regards to the about our timetable and our work programme, we'll come to that as a separate item, but I take your point as well. I think this committee has probably got off fairly lightly in previous years, but I recognised at the start of this year that we're going to have to do a bit more work than we've been used to. It's at least one more meeting, but I think we're probably going to, as you quite rightly point out, we may have to squeeze another 1 or 2 in as well. Andrew, I'll just bring you in then on the question that was raised of the finance team and the resilience of the finance team at this particular time.
Thank you, Chair. I think I'd say that we were also worried about well-being and concern for the finance team. It's high on our agenda, if I'm honest with you. We need a team that feels supported and has the capacity that it needs to do the work that's required of it from the organisation. I'd say the sickness isn't related to well-being issues, at least not pressure of work related issues, in my view. There have been some departures as well. The technical finance, professional finance market is dynamic. There are many opportunities out there for people who aspire. So it's a challenge as well. But I genuinely believe actually that the shared service arrangement that we've entered into gives us an opportunity to actually offer greater roles, greater resilience as well. The opportunity to specialise, shared capacity, all I think beneficial in probably what is quite a challenging market, I think, to get finance staff in at the moment. But we're also, as Chris has said, we've gone to the temporary market as well to provide support to our colleagues as well, so that they don't feel up against it really, and with the technical skills where there are gaps in the structure as well. So keeping a fully functioning finance team going is high on my list of priorities, Chris's as well. So we are mindful of that.
Thank you. The other thing I just wanted to pick up on was I understand your point about the chair or the chief exec of BT versus the chief exec of Colchester City Council. But I think we do need to be mindful of the pressures that are on our senior leadership team as well, and across the board. And there's certainly some reference to that in the next item on the agenda, isn't there? So I think we just need to be mindful of the pressure on all of our staff across the City Council at this particular time. Pam, I'm going to let you briefly come back, and then I'm going to go back to Councillor Smithson.
You're being very indulgent, but I'd like to think my points are worth making, but you'll be the judge of that. First of all, your point is noted with regard to the clash of meetings. I guess the consolation is that that meeting will be recorded. So I do hope. Well,
it really is. It's the second important briefing that's been scheduled at short notice that clashes with a long-standing board meeting. If members are to take their responsibilities as board members seriously, they have to be present. They have to contribute, and this is too important an issue to schedule. But equally, as I say, we've got a new portfolio holder for housing who should be at this meeting because CBH are reporting to this very committee at the next meeting. That's why it's important that this board meeting goes ahead.
So you're absolutely right, and the point has been noted, and I will be speaking directly to the head of governance about how we can avoid such clashes in the future. But I think there is a point also about the volume of briefings that's going on and the difficulty of scheduling them. But I think this is a really good example of one that could have been done differently. Secondly, as head of paid service, it's my responsibility to take the staff well-being extremely seriously. But I'm afraid to say, not just the well-being of the finance team I'm concerned about, it's the well-being of staff right across the organisation, which is why in the next item we'll be looking at the very high risk associated with what I consider to be a weakened workforce. And that's as a result of two things. One is year on year on year of austerity, coupled with the pandemic, coupled with really significant financial challenge. I'm extremely worried about each and every one of our members of staff, and in particular the senior leadership board, which is smaller than it's ever been before and is taking a disproportionate amount of pressure. However, consoled by the support we get from members, particularly our cabinet. Very briefly, I'd like to thank G&A for the additional workload that they're taking on this year. We need you to work with us through these challenges. And a very brief mention of shared services. For me, shared services is one of the really important priorities going forward. It's one of my top priorities. The work that we're doing with Epping, Braintree and ourselves is moving at pace. And we do have a very clear ambition to create a single back office environment which will deliver significant savings. And the leader was with me a week or so ago when North East Essex councils came together and agreed a protocol for further work on shared services. And that will give us resilience, it will help us with our workforce, their well-being, and of course financial savings. Thank you for giving me those few moments.
Thank you. Rhys, did you want to come back on anything?
No, I'm fine, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Good. Right. Councillor Sunnucks.
Yes, I'm really pleased with the direction things are taking. There's a completely different, it feels there's a fresh wind, a fresh tone. Thank you to our new Section 151 officer. Thank you for what Pam has said. I'm now going to say something more controversial. I think this committee needs to absolutely pull its socks up. We've been sitting there while these problems, has obviously been a serious breakdown of the audit. Some of it, I must say, I was unimpressed with the presentation from BDO today, but equally, there's stuff we haven't been particularly good on. And there's been a serious breakdown. It's been hidden from us. We haven't asked the questions hard enough, and I think we're there now. My worry is that everything we've talked about this evening has been about process. We still haven't actually gone through and scrutinised the accounts, which is that those accounts are the cornerstone, and some of them are important things, just as Councillor Dundas said. Some things are just presentation things. The important things are to do with the reserves. We haven't been through, we haven't got transparency through to all those movements on the reserves, and we've got to get there. We've got to work harder until we can at least satisfy ourselves. When we are doing our job properly, then it's easier to communicate out to other members. But at the moment, I don't feel we're there by a long way, and I think we've been asleep at the wheel a little bit. Now, just going to how we go forward, I think the first word is transparency. It would be great if, when these problems occur, they are shared, that we don't pile them all up into a great big thing and then just talk about how we got making a deadline and whipping people to meet a deadline for the accounts. That won't get us where we need to be. We actually need to, where there's a problem, we need to understand it. We need to understand this infrastructure problem. We need to resist the temptation to blame government or the auditors, and we must take responsibility ourselves. And I'd like to see a lot more energy and drive in and determination to solve the problems, a lot more front foot stuff and a lot less, oh, it's a national problem and everything else. No, let's actually get this thing right. And let's give our new team time to do it. Don't let's whip them against the deadline or something like that. I'd much rather they got to the bottom of everything. If there are any adjustments to be made, then let's make them now. And you know, I think we're in a position now to do it. I think we've got the right mentality to be able to do that. But often these things hang over you and you fudge them from year to year. Let's just get right to the bottom of it and sort it out. And I think that's what I really need to say. We need to schedule a session where we go through the substance of the accounts. Everything is about process. When can we do this? When can we do that? And then the only thing of substance we've said is that, well, as far as we can see, there's nothing really wrong. Well, I don't think that's there. I think we've got to go through the accounts. We need to hear from our Section 151 officer, for example, what he thinks we should be taking out of the accounts, which bits he thinks are important. I think the reserves are the bit we've got to concentrate on, but maybe I'm wrong. I'm not experienced in public sector finance. I think we should have a laser-like focus on the reserves, and we should let all the other little bits and so on, those are the pretty bits. But what we need to know is that we've got money to keep on running this council, and we need to know how, there's all these earmarked reserves. What are the rules surrounding them? There's capital reserves. What are those capital? What can we use them for? And then there's huge, great transfers. The opening balances on the reserves don't even agree in the draft accounts we've got. You know, what's going on? Why are we moving things around? I feel that's the area that, as a committee, we need to get to. Sorry, I sound as if I'm lecturing the committee, but I do feel we need to step up a little bit.
Thank you, William. You and I are in agreement about the workload that this committee needs to undertake, and we started to do that last year, didn't we? We've turned over a number of stones with CCHL, for example, at this committee. That has set a lot of work ongoing around the commercial holdings group. So I think we have done some of that work, but you're quite right. We need to do more of that work as a committee. I'm not sure I agree with you about, you know, the auditors not being a national issue, because certainly I was hearing on this morning's meeting and a meeting previously just a few weeks back that it is a national issue. Ministerial involvement suggests that it is a national issue.
But
so I think we have to
take responsibility for our own destiny,
yes,
our own accounts.
I accept that, but we can only do that within the confines that are set by central government, which is what was done when it comes to auditing local government. So I think, yes, we need to take responsibility. We need to ensure that we are responsible for those things that we have accountability for, that we have control over. And I get the impression from the things that we've heard in this particular item tonight that our chief executive and our 151 officer are on top of those things, along with our assistant 151 officer. So I don't think that I have major concerns in that respect now. Chris, I see your hand up, and I'm going to bring you in, and then I'm going to break. I'm going to close this item, and I'm going to have a break. Chris?
Thank you for that. It's just to sort of pick up on the point about reserves, and as you probably already know, the Code of Accounting Practice is highly prescriptive about what we should and shouldn't do around reserves. So there is sort of limited room to manoeuvre, but I already know from my limited time at Colchester that there are opportunities potentially to simplify the way in which we deal with reserves. I must emphasise, though, that there's actually nothing technical. I haven't seen anything technically wrong with what the council does, but there could be opportunities to simplify the way in which we do it, and that's already becoming apparent. That is something that we picked up on, so I think that's quite erudite actually in that area.
Thank you. Very, very, very quickly.
A copy of the SIPFA code costs 470 quid, which I don't particularly want to pay. Is there any chance that we can somehow get a copy to members so that we know what this magic code is?
Yeah, the phrase to my left was, if you've got a wheelbarrow. Why don't we, but there was a fair point that we ought to take away, which is the quality and accessibility of information. So leave that with us, William.
Can we have a copy of the SIPFA code? Or was it secret?
Can I leave that with our Section 151 officer to send by email whether there is an answer to that or not? It is 10 to 8. Conscious of the resilience of our officers as well as members around the table, I'm going to suggest we now break. We conclude that item. There was nothing for us to do other than to hear, to comment, and we return at 8 p.m. sharp and get through the last item so that we can all head off home. Thank you all. Welcome back, everyone. The next item on the agenda, item 9, the year-end review of risk management. And Hayley McGrath, in her inimitable way, is going to introduce it to us.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not quite sure how to follow that one. I'll give it a try. So for those members that have been on the committee for a little while will know that I bring 2 reports a year relating to risk management to this committee. We do an interim report around about Christmas time, but we do a year-end report as well. So the report in front of you is the end of the 22-23 financial year and the review of risk management. And it sets out, if you like, 3 particular areas. It talks about the strategy for managing risk. It talks about the work that has been undertaken during 22-23, and it talks about the current strategic risk register. So although it's a report for the year end of 22-23, we bring you the current register because it would be out of date to bring you the one from the end of the financial year. So you can see the issues at this point in time. I'm going to come back to the risk register because I think that's the one that will probably spark the most debate. So I'm just going to run through the strategy for 23-24. Now what we do is it's good practice to bring the strategy in front of you once a year so you have an opportunity to have a look at it, just to make sure that it provides us with the reassurance that we manage our risks appropriately here at Colchester. There's no changes in particular to the 23-24 strategy. I have updated some job descriptions and titles to reflect the new management structure here at Colchester. So in terms of, for example, the governance, head of governance, etc., and the new structure that we have. But in all, there is no change to how we propose to manage our risk process. It is reviewed by our auditors every other year, and we have a clean bill of health from them. So we have a reasonable assurance, and the audit reports obviously are reported to you separately. So you've seen the results of those. So with regards to the work that's been undertaken during 22-23, I haven't given you an exhaustive list of every item that we do under risk management, and primarily it revolves around making sure that we have a process, talking about the strategic risk register, talking about operational risks, but I have highlighted a couple of areas that we've been spending quite a bit of time working on during the financial year. One of those is related to the reports that we had during the year, our peer review challenge, plus the reports on the companies. And as you know, they've been reported to you separately, and there is a lot of governance and risk work related to those. So myself and the head of governance have been working closely with both of our companies to look at governance arrangements, to look at risk processes, and to provide some advice and guidance with those. And I'm working quite closely at the moment with Rachel Bell, who's the finance manager of CCHL, to make sure that our processes are aligned. We've also been looking at health and safety. So risk isn't just about the strategic stuff, there is about the physical risks that we face as well. And during the year, we had an opportunity where we had an interim health and safety manager. So our permanent health and safety manager left for a new post, and we had an interim come in and assist us. And actually he was able to bring with him a whole process for managing health and safety, putting in a management system to actually gather our health and safety risks and to provide reassurance to managers across the organisation. It's a very comprehensive programme, and we are rolling that out across all of our services at the moment, but it does give a very sound base for health and safety going forwards. That will be reported to yourselves in more detail later on in the year. You're due a report on health and safety in October. We give you an annual update. So our new health and safety manager and myself will come along and give you some more details about that system. So with regards to the rest of the work, we have, as I say, been working with our companies, making sure that our processes are in place. I also work with our joint committees, so the North Essex Parking Partnership and the Colchester and Ipswich Museum Service. They both have their own risk processes, and I provide their committees and boards with support in managing their risks and their governance arrangements going forwards. That brings me on to the Strategic Risk Register. So for those of you that have seen our Strategic Risk Register previously, It looks slightly different this time round, and what I would say is there's been a lot of work with the Senior Leadership Board to look at risks and to do an honest review of the risks that the organisation faces at the moment. And a lot of those risks have already been touched on this evening from the previous conversations. And I think it's fair to say that there's been some challenge with the Senior Leadership Board, and I am in a very fortunate position where I can provide that challenge to them, and I can ask them the difficult questions and not get fired for asking them and not get into trouble, but they do have some very honest responses. And I've recently spent a good 3 hours session with them talking about risk. So the head of governance and myself sat with the board. We went through the risk register and we had a very honest conversation about where we are as an organisation and what does our risk register need to reflect. So we've updated it slightly, and you can see it's quite small in the agenda, but if you see it online, I can send you a copy electronically. What we've done is we've listed the objective outcomes for our strategic plan. So obviously we've got a revised strategic plan. We have our 6 outcomes from that. And what we've done is related our risks to those strategic objectives and outcomes, so we can actually provide that reassurance across the organisation that we're looking at the issues that will stop us delivering what is ultimately, from our corporate governance point of view, our objectives as an organisation. The risk register itself, we've looked at the risks, we've slimmed down the number of risks. That doesn't mean the organisation is at any less risk than it was before, but what we wanted to do was concentrate on those areas that are really concerning. We have a risk register that is a long list of issues, but that means we would lose focus on those risks that we really do need to be concentrating on. And the risk register should only be highlighting those that are red or orange risks, not the ones that are being managed or aren't that significant in the overall terms of our delivery of services. I think it's fair to say that senior leadership have been very honest about the risks that are faced, and we set out the risks in their slightly new wording for you. And I think it's fair to reflect the Chief Executive's concerns about the organisational resilience, and Pam's already mentioned that this evening, in terms of that being one of our most key risks. Is the organisation is facing some uphill struggles. We've got some difficult times ahead, but we're starting from a position where the organisation, not just the staff, but the whole organisation is feeling, I suppose, slightly jaded from everything else that's gone on previously. Austerity, then COVID-19, and in a position where our reserves and our resilience as an organisation are already feeling a strain, and now we're being asked to provide more or deliver more services with less resources. And I think it's a true recognition that that is one of the key risks that we face going forward, to be able to deliver those. I don't propose to go through all the individual risks, but I'm sure that the committee may well have some questions. And what I'd like to be able to do tonight is for the risk management strategy to be agreed by yourselves, so I can take that forward to Cabinet for approval, so that will go to the next Cabinet meeting if you approve it tonight, which will then go forward to full council because it does form part of our policy framework. Thank you.
Thank you, Hayley. Inimitable as ever. I think for me, looking at this report, it's different to the ones that we've previously had, and I don't think that's a bad thing. Certainly, when I looked at this report, my concern was the number of very high risk items that are in it. However, that said, I think coming back to one or two of the remarks that have been made around the table this evening, that shows an element of transparency. This is a published document, and it shows that we are prepared to show ourselves warts and all to the wider public as well as to members. So I'm pleased with that. There are one or two things that I've got some questions or comments about, but I'll open it up to members around the table. I've got Councillor Harris first, then Councillor Dundas, then Councillor Smithson. So I'll start there.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I did notice the changes. I've sat on this committee at various iterations over the years and listened to the reports, and I found myself nodding, sitting at home, with a lot of the strategy here. So I'm fully support, Chair, of the strategy. I've ticked all the boxes for myself at home, looking through all you've written. A couple of comments. The challenges I think that you will undoubtedly face, or certainly the Deputy Chief Executive or whoever's responsible, on one of them, well, the workforce well-being, that's one of our assets, the workforce. We need them on side. And all the words there I'm fully supportive of, but I just wonder about how to get those staff to be honest with us, not with you, but with us. And they may be reluctant to be too honest with you, and that's my worry, because they are aware that there's a cosh on all of us, quite rightly so, because it's public finance, etc. But if there's challenges there they don't feel they can cope with, there may be stress levels that they can't cope with. And I know you're surveying them and you're monitoring the morale, etc. And I just wonder whether there's any innovation that maybe that the senior management leave can use to actually encourage them to be more than the honest than they have in the past, to be refreshingly honest, to say, with this I can't cope, I need a way out of this. Just to make sure that we are getting the right feedback. The second thing I want to say really is really no other thing than a comment. The one on financial equality mentions the welfare team, Chair, and it talks about the people that I am in absolute awe of. When I go to my advice surgeries every month, which is in with the food bank, quite often the welfare team will be there, and I've seen the work that they do there is impeccable, excellent, bar none, and the number of people that I think all councillors have referred to that team is brilliant. So I think that was just a comment for me to agree with what you've written, not to compliment, not to actually make any changes to it. It was just to make sure that that was took back, so that they understand how important the work that they do not only affects the people outside these four walls, but also the people within the council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. Pam, did you want to comment?
Yes, please. Thank you, Councillor Harris. So first of all, with regard to the level of honesty that our staff feel empowered to exhibit, I would say that is significantly improved. And I think there's a variety of reasons for that. First of all, the ongoing consistent messaging that goes out across the organisation, whether that's webinars that I lead or shared with the senior leadership team. We're very keen to share the degree of challenge we're facing and encouraging our staff to join with that. When I came into post, I introduced a concept of listen, learn and lead. And I run those sessions regularly every month. And that is an opportunity for any member of staff, and I've got to say they've been very well attended, to share with me in a totally confidential environment their honest feelings about how things are. The Deputy Chief Executive and I have recently embarked upon a set of service presentations, and that tells it as it is, warts and all, to every single part of the organisation. It's a very onerous commitment for both of us, but we undertake it with real commitment. It's really important that we do it. Between Lindsay and I, we will, in the next 3 months, have covered every single service area of the council and have shared the challenge we face, the risks that we're encountering, and the role of our staff in helping us respond. I've already referred to my real and serious concerns about well-being and resilience. I think they can be seen to be reflected all the way from the Senior Leadership Board, who are now taking a series of well-earned holidays, right down to our supervisors and loaders in the refuse and collection service, who of course also have the added pressure of abuse to deal with. I'd like to just very specifically talk about the employment and financial inclusion team that you've referred to. I had the opportunity to present to them last week, and they are completely amazing. However, they are feeling the pressure. They are feeling the impact of the cost of living crisis being experienced by our staff, but they have an overwhelming commitment by our residents, but they have an overwhelming commitment to serve them wherever and whenever they can. So I'm pleased to report that they are in the food banks where our most vulnerable residents are. They're visited very regularly by our employment and financial inclusion team. They're in the One Colchester hub, just off the high street here, and they are a group of most outstanding and committed staff whose well-being I take very seriously.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I share those comments about our staff across the piece. Councillor Dundas.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to pick up on that, I mean, we've spoken a lot this evening about reserves, and when we talk about reserves, we tend to think of a sort of bank balance figure, but actually probably our most important reserves are actually our staffing capacity and our ability of our staff to deliver. Just wanted to pick up on a couple of things. Firstly, I think this is very honest, actually, and I'm pleased about that. And I do like the presentation. I think it's a step in the right direction. So I would support that. We have got a lot of reds in there, but you know that's if it's not honest, there's no point in having a risk register. I want to pick up on a couple. B, budget strategy. We've got list of their potential consequences. In there, we've got a section 114 notice. Now, I haven't heard anything this evening that leads me to believe that actually we are in particular danger of a section 114 notice. And there's a big leap from, you know, requirement for in-year budget and service adjustments to a section 114 notice. There's a big gap between them. I'm just a bit concerned that people might read it and see very high next to section 114 notice and leap to conclusions, but I guess it's open to interpretation. But I get why it has to be in there, but I think we may need to make it clear that I don't think anybody thinks that that is round the corner at all. I guess in terms of monitoring part B, a lot of it comes down to this committee, particularly around the in-year budget monitoring. We've had the first quarter. Presumably the first quarter outturn at some point will become available and will be looked at by this committee. We're already a month away from the first quarter, so hopefully that'll be available soon, because we have about 4 or 5 million of savings in the MTFF, so it needs very careful monitoring to check that we're actually delivering on those. So I would, if I could make a suggestion that as soon as that's available, that's made available to the members of this committee, which doesn't include me, regardless of when it next happens to be on the work agenda, because you could be talking a 2-3 month gap before you actually discuss it. And I think that is really where you need to look very, very closely on a month by month basis of how we're performing against expectations, because we do know it's tight and we've been quite ambitious in the planned savings. Perhaps the only one I would perhaps quite slightly question, if I can just scroll down, is J, where we talk about projects being delayed and struggling with resources. We've put medium next to that, but as we know, it's kind of already happened. You know, we know we've got resource issues and delivery issues on the capital programme. So we're kind of, I just feel giving a medium to something which we know has actually happened or we're in the middle of trying to deal with is perhaps not being entirely honest. Would probably be my only real criticism of the categories awarded.
Thank you. I will take that comment back to Senior Leadership Board. What I would say is, because of the circumstances that we are facing at this point in time, the decision has been made by Senior Leadership Board to review the risk register every month. So previously I was taking it once a quarter to board to review. But because we know it's such a fluid situation and some of the issues that are moving very quickly, especially the economic environment, they want to do that review monthly. So I will go back to them, and at the next review, we'll look at the wording for J to make sure that it does truly reflect the current situation that we are facing at this point in time. With regards to the budget monitoring, I can see the Section 151 officer nodding at me from the end of the table as you were talking. So I think Chris may well come in on that one once I'm finished, just to give you some confirmation about that. And I think it is sometimes difficult to see some of those potential issues that we will face, some of those potential consequences. None of the risk register is about things, or should be about things, that have actually happened, that are situations that we are currently in. They are, if you like, worst case scenarios that we have to be cognizant of, and we have to be working towards monitoring and making sure that we can avoid those. So we have to put what the ultimate consequence could be. And I think having the Section 114 notices on there is quite pertinent at this point in time, because there are so many references to Section 114 notices at the moment in various authorities, some fairly local to us who have issued them, others who are issuing warnings that potentially next year they might be issuing them. And I think it's something that we have to be honest and say, if we don't manage our budgets properly, we could potentially be in that situation. But I get that caveating. So we'll look at the wording just to make sure it's a bit clearer for you. Chris, I don't know if you want to come in.
Yeah, it's just to confirm that we are preparing the Q1 position at the moment, and it is due before governance and audit on the 12th of September.
Thank you. And I just come back on that one as well. We need to bear in mind that we are not Cabinet, we are the Governance and Audit Committee. So, and I know, because I'm attending them regularly, that there is a regular, I'm not sure whether, is it monthly or even more frequently than that, David? There is a meeting looking at the budgetary position very frequently. So I know that Cabinet is monitoring the budgetary position on at least a monthly basis, if not more frequently than that. So, but I think we need to be mindful of our role as Governance and Audit Committee, not as the Budget Management Committee. Pam?
Very briefly on that very point, Chair. Yes, you're right. Cabinet is reviewing the in-year position very regularly, but I think there's more to say than that, because the leader has insisted and directed, and you don't often adopt that style, but on this occasion the leader has directed us to develop a very robust framework for monitoring our in-year positions, and that triangulates a whole range of factors that allows us to have transparency and clarity week on week, month on month, as we progress through what has to be the most challenging set of savings we've ever had to deliver. And I know, because we've had conversations, Section 151 officer and I, that he too believes they, as I do, they're very, very challenging and they are at risk. So we have to be very careful in terms of our regular monitoring. Thank you.
Thank you. Did you want to? No. David?
Thank you. I just wanted to go to the point of about working this committee hard. It requires you to understand what's going on. So I think we ought to take that away in terms of the cycle. I mean, I say to Paul directly, I share things with you as and when I think, you know, they add something extra. So that spirit of ensuring that the committee is well cited, what that means we'll go and look at. But I just reaffirm, yes, it's regular, it's intense as it should be, it's directive, because on this being so fundamental, that's what's required of the organisation, and it includes tracking savings section by section, slice by slice. Only delivery against that is going to get us to where we want to be. But I'll take the point of the committee's insight and we'll do what we can to help.
Thank you. And I was just going to come back, Paul, on the, because I'd picked up about Section 114 notice as well, but I think Hayley's already dealt with that quite adroitly, so I won't belabor the point. I've got Councillor Smithson next, please.
I'm just going to come back ever so briefly on the, you're absolutely right, that it ultimately it's Cabinet's job to manage the budget, and it's the Executive's job, but obviously this committee has an important role scrutinising what Cabinet are up to. So, and I'm not a member of this committee, but I would encourage this committee to do that to its fullest. I think it works, and I think Cabinet as we've heard from the leader, are in a listening mood, so we can be constructive.
Thank you. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. My favourite subject, risk management. Been waiting for this all night. So I have 4 points, 2 regarding the risk register and 2 regarding the strategy. So page 40 of the meeting pack talks about taking more risks. So it's page 4 of the strategy, talks about taking more risks. Are you able to give any examples or share anything? Because that's quite a bold statement to say we are taking more risks as an organisation.
I think a lot of the things that we're undertaking at the moment are prime examples. The Turnstone development itself is an example of where we're taking those risks. And the wording is based on a strategy that's been around for a little while. So maybe I need to look at the more risks and just look at our risks. But we are a very innovative local authority compared to a lot of other authorities of our size and some of our neighbours, and I have quite a lot of risk conversations with colleagues. I think our approach to some of that potential and development is far more advanced than some others, but I think it's about how we do it. It's taking it in that cautious manner. We can take those risks, we need to manage them. So I take your point about the more risks, but I do think we are quite an innovative organisation that is taking those extra bits that perhaps some of our closer authorities aren't.
And I think that's exactly what the strategy should say, is we're innovative and consequently that leads to more risk exposure, but not necessarily more risk, if that makes sense. Which brings me on to the second point. I don't see anything in the strategy about the council's risk appetite, and that's unusual. I would expect to see that in here.
We haven't included it in the strategy. We do have an assessment of our risk appetite. I take your point on board. We can look at reporting that through to the committee and adding that into the strategy later on if that's appropriate.
Thank you. So then turning to the risk register itself, I'm going to ask you a very open question, and this is your opportunity to speak freely. What are the black swan events that we should be worrying about?
I don't think that's a question that I should answer. I'm the risk advisor. The black swan events are for management and for the leader and for cabinet to look at and consider. I think there is a range of issues that could trip us up, that could come out of nowhere, but that's not for me to decide.
And that's exactly why I asked you, because I see no evidence that they are being talked about at the moment. I'm sure they are, but we've just had one for the last 2.5 years. We should, perhaps be thinking about our black swans again. So I don't know if anyone's seen the press today. COVID cases are up 60. A question for perhaps the leader and Section 151 officer. We've talked a huge amount tonight about the financial statements. Then the production of those financial statements, the potential for qualified statements if we don't get things done on time. I don't see those mentioned here. Have they been considered? Are they included somewhere else? It feels to me we've spent a long time talking about these. They're not on the strategic risk register. Is that a conscious decision?
Right. Thanks, Rhys. Yeah, just one thing. Given our commitment to equality and diversity as an organisation, I'm uncomfortable when anyone refers to a black swan event. Yeah,
it's a recognised
no, I know that.
risk management term.
But those terms have moved on as well, and so yeah. But I think that there are issues there that you quite rightly raise, especially in terms of the language in the the documentation. I'll bring Hayley back in, and then Pam, and then Andrew to respond to one or two of the comments there. Hayley?
Yep, sure. I just wanted to come back on those unexpected issues, the big issues that could interrupt our services. And actually, we talk about those as part of our business continuity processes. So we have a separate business continuity report that comes to you annually, and that sets out those big impacts. So things like pandemics are part of our plans for business continuity. So with our risk management process, we look at the things that, if you like, are more likely to happen, and the things that affect our strategic direction. The issues that you're referring to are more about the service delivery and what could stop that service delivery, and that's where our business continuity processes come in. So when I bring the business continuity report to you, I'll bring you all the additional plans that we have that support our overall corporate plan. So we look at IT interruption, we look at mass pandemic, we look at loss of staff for whatever reason, we look at severe weather. So some of those things that are those catastrophe events are more in our business continuity realm than our strategic risk management realm.
Pam?
2 points, if I may. First of all, with regard to the phrase more risks, I think there are genuinely more risks out there for Colchester City Council. One, the level of savings that I've just referred to, that is a significant risk for us. Secondly, our approach to leadership, certainly at an officer level, is a bit of a risk. We've flattened, we've reduced our leadership team. That poses additional risk, and particularly in terms of staff resilience, but it's, again, a contribution to our savings target. Thirdly, the resizing of the workforce. In order to deliver the ambitions, which still are very extensive, you'd think we'd be taking on more staff. But because of the financial realities that we face, we're resizing our workforce. In other words, we're going to be smaller, £500,000 smaller by the end of the year if we hit our target. That poses significant risks. Today, I've turned down 2 recruitment requests in order to hit that target and stay financially solvent. That is a risk. With regard to, if you will excuse the phrase, a black swan, it's the first time I've ever heard that phrase. I don't know what it means, although I'm getting a sense of what it means, that these are big issues, as Hayley put it, that could undermine our services. And in that sense, I've got something to say. First of all, I think the phrase isn't helpful, not just from a diversity point of view, because it excludes people because we don't understand it. I've never heard of it, I don't understand it. But on the basis of, are there any big issues which could undermine our services? Clearly there are. I would say complacency has no place in our senior level thinking these days. The COVID pandemic has taught us so many lessons that I think we're almost ready for anything. However, what I would bear in mind is point 1 on the risk register, that we would enter into another set of major risks with a weakened workforce, with a less resilient organisation, for all the reasons that are really clear and in the narrative in point 1. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, you know, let's not get hung up on semantics and language here tonight, because there are more important things for us to deal with. I mean, you and I have been involved in the risk management business, albeit slightly differently, for a number of years, Reece. So, yeah.
If I may, regardless of the terminology, it is the big catastrophic events completely. It's definitely not a new term. It's been around since 1929 with the Wall Street crash. It's the first recognised big one. And it's literally in Risk Management 101. When you do your qualification, it's up there straight away. So it's not a new concept, but I appreciate it's not widely known outside the risk community. The question I have, I've heard quite a lot about staff numbers and headcount and resilience. So just looking at our headcount and staffing numbers, they're higher now than they've been at any point in the last 5 years in terms of actual headcount. This is from Colchester SharePoint site, 875 headcount. The difference is over the last 5 years is the FTE, so the full-time equivalent, is considerably lower. So that is a deliberate choice of the organisation to allow people to work flexibly, to allow people to work part-time, to allow things like job share. So I think we, as an organisation, have to look at those sorts of things as well, because we can't just keep saying headcount is reducing, because actually headcount is significantly up on where it was 5 years ago. But the number of FTEs is down. That is a decision the council, the organisation has taken. So I think we need to be mindful of that when we talk about challenges and recruitment freezes and what have you. We don't have to allow that situation. We don't have to allow people to work flexibly. It's a choice. I think we just need to be mindful of that.
Okay, thanks. I've got Andrew, did you want to just come back quickly on the point that Councillor Smithson was making early on? And then I'll come to Councillor King and to the Chief Exec.
Thank you, Chair. I'd probably say the risk around the financial statements is covered under budget strategy, so the risk is already on there. It does say, in fact, the new 151 officer is also reviewing all elements and assumptions underpinning the budget, and I would consider the financial statements to be one of those assumptions that underpin the budget.
That's item B on the risk register. Councillor King?
I thank others for the answer I would have given. I recognise the term and understand it as you described it. So I won't add to what's been said, other than to say there's a philosophy which I think is an assurance that I hope you hold, which is that the whole approach, based upon the fundamental that you have to balance the books or you have little else, is about ensuring that, to use your analogy, we understand the colour of our different swans. You know, we're going down the river of time, more philosophy is available. We're looking at everything. So it's back to that, you turn over everything, you appraise it in today's circumstances, glancing forward as best you can. You're making a judgment about the risks, that all of the factors that make for an effective delivery through an organisation, changing organisation in changing times. And you know, there is something for me about not just looking in strands of risk management, but looking at the collective whole. So there's a sense for me that we've got the right kind of approach, and actually this change in the way the risk strategy is presented and the risks are analysed, I think helps that bigger picture piece, and that's right for the times that we're in. If I could offer a view, and Pam will widen it as necessary on the people piece, it's absolutely the right thing to do to have a philosophy that says what matters. Your true point is you understand the full-time equivalency FTE, not just the head count. Because the resilience for your organisation, having people prepared to work in different working patterns, is very much the way of this is how you hold on to people. You're giving them choices about their lifestyle, and that's part of the package that makes Colchester a place that retains its people when it may not always match every salary. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. I think it's fair to say that some of those options that we've offered to staff have actually saved the council money, haven't they?
A lot of them are around that, but not only that. If you go back to when the budget strategy was set and we set out to implement it, the chief exec and team, with my blessing, and I think we've had this conversation here, said that the way in which we would employ people and turn them to task, the way in which we could make savings included looking at those working patterns and recognising there was benefit for the organisation in terms of resilience, capacity and financial savings, and also that ability to keep people over the longer term. Good for them, good for us.
Thank you. Pam?
I'll be brief, but thank you for bringing me in, Chair. So with regard to the flexible part-time commitment we've made as an organisation, it is a choice, but I think there's a moral imperative here, and it falls into three parts. First of all, it does allow us to bring into our workforce those groups who may well have been excluded from the workforce, and to make sure that they're better represented. I would make a particular point about women, or if we want to widen the issue, working parents. Secondly, I think if we were to have a much more fixed model, it wouldn't reflect the significant improvements in retention and productivity that we've seen. And thirdly, it attracts a wider recruitment market, not only geographically, but also in terms of the type of skill that we're able to attract. And ultimately, the outcome is a richer, more diverse workforce that better mirrors the community that we serve. And without that degree of flexibility, I think we'd be less representative. Thank you.
Thank you. Rhys, is there anything? Thanks very much. Okay, Councillor Smith next.
Thank you. I'm going to avoid getting involved in discussions about the colours of swans. Suffice it to say, though, that I spent many summer holidays down in Dawlish, which is renowned, of course, for having black swans. So I always found them quite interesting because black swans were quite normal when I was growing up. Returning quickly to the subject of the meeting, I think on the risk register, there's a series of issues which have got a high degree of correlation. I'm thinking here particularly at the economic climate on item B and also the financial inequality. We know, for example, that the pressure that the council's budget's under for temporary accommodation is very severe at the moment. It's being impacted by all the factors down here, plus the fact that some social housing providers are not now taking up their provisions of social housing for various reasons. And that's adding to the number of people requiring temporary accommodation. When you couple that with the economic climate and the difficulties that are being faced there, you're getting a risk that if one of them falls over, another one will fall over. And I wonder how we're going to be able to bring those risks out. Because individually, the scores are fine. But if, for example, you were to have serious economic downturn that resulted in a high level of unemployment, you would see the economic climate going, the financial inequality going, and also the budget strategy all being directly impacted. So maybe we have to look a little bit at the cross correlation between them to get a true picture of the risk. And the final thought I've got is on the risk management strategy. There's a whole list of people who are responsible for various things. You leaders seem to be responsible for lots of things. Cabinet members get a bit more. Governance and Audit get some. Even employees get some. The only people who get away with this are councillors. I do think actually we should perhaps show that councillors do also have some responsibility, and we should perhaps put them down with employees, because as we all know, councillors are not employees. So perhaps we should put them down there, just so that the rest of them get caught for the same as the rest of us on this committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Smith, for reminding us of our responsibilities and our accountabilities. Councillor Sunnox.
Yes, I've got 2 points. The first is an unusual one for an accountant. Workforce well-being seems to be a #1 thing. And I really hope when we come to this year's budget, we don't try and do the same amount of things with fewer and fewer people and salami slicing everywhere. I absolutely think that that is an unhealthy organisation. I'd never want to be running a company like that. And I hope we don't have to run a council like that. We have to be a lot more focused in what we're doing. And well, I'm straying from the Governance and Audit Committee, but I think it's worth just putting down an early marker on that. And I've heard our Chief Executive expressing some of the same sentiments. So there's a lot of support there from this quarter. The second thing is, I like the risk matrix. I think it's one of the best organised and most strategic ones that I've seen, but it has a whomping great omission in that the project risk doesn't have any project risk, and that seems to be in a project risk register that no councillor ever sees. And I feel that's a huge, and we have raised it before, and it was said to be, there was a suggestion we ought to look at it, but I really think we should look at that. I really think some of those projects are big and really could hit us hard, and they need to be, whether they go onto the strategic risk register or whether they're a separate thing, somewhere they need to be monitored.
Thank you. Yeah. Do you want to just pick up on that last point?
Yeah, I'll just pick up on a couple of points. Start with the last one first, the project risks. Totally get the point. It's managed by the project management team. I will talk to Senior Leadership Board and the project management team about how we collate that information, because obviously there is a very large risk register for projects, how we summarise that to bring that as part of the strategic risk reporting to yourselves. It's getting the level of information right for members. So I don't want to overload you with every single project risk because there's a lot of those, but what we do need to do is summarise those and bring you a report, as well as what we're trying to do is develop our operational risk side. So we have the new management structure at Colchester, and I'm going to start work with the new heads of service to look at operational risk registers, so we have a much more cohesive approach and actually bringing the high risk operational risks into Senior Leadership Board to sit beside the strategic risk register, so you've got much more of a cross view, and we'll bring the project risks into that as well. I can't guarantee it will be overnight, but we will look at a process of how we can bring that information to you to give you that reassurance. Yeah, sure.
Can we not simplify it down? And I always think that the debate within the team on which the half dozen most important project risks, can we have that quite quickly? Because there really are some big ones out there that really should be looked at. So let's be contemplating how to do it comprehensively. Just choose the big ones, and maybe the same on the operational ones. The ones that could really hit us, let's have those up to this committee or some other committee, whatever you think. But it does need looking at.
Yep, and if the Chief Exec is happy, what I'll do, Councillor Sunnox, is work alongside you and have a conversation about those project risks and the rest of the committee members to say, this is how we can present them, this is what the key risks are, so we can make sure that it gives you the information reassurance you need going forwards to do the work that this committee needs to do as part of that assurance process. And just going back to the comment from Councillor Smith about members. Members do appear in Appendix 3 of the strategy on the table, and their responsibility for risk is set out there. So they're not in that main list at the front, but they are mentioned in the strategy. So that you do have a responsibility, and all members have a responsibility to manage risk, which is why for every committee report there is a section on risk management implications. That's part of that assessment for all committees going forwards and all members.
Thank you, Hayley. Gotcha.
Perhaps the table could be adjusted.
Right. Councillor Smithson, I'm going to make yours the last contribution on this item. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I knew it's in the word members somewhere, but I figured we were the members. I just have a question, because I understand that the commercial organisations also have their own individual risk registers, and in those they identify strategic risks. Do any of those warrant inclusion on the Board of Council's strategic risk register? Thank you.
There's a slight difference in the terms of the strategic risks for the companies. Now, going forwards as part of the regular reporting to this committee, they should be bringing their strategic risks to you. For the council's strategic risk register, it should be the council's risk of being associated with the company or the relationship with the company and the impact that has on the council, because it's the council's delivery of strategic objectives. So the risk as it sits in the companies, I'm not saying there are significant ones that need to come. As I say, I'm working with Rachel at the moment, looking at their risk processes, but the impetus of the risk or how it's positioned on the council's risk register is slightly different to the companies, because it's the company delivery that's the risk for the company. And for us, it's that relationship to the company. So there's a slightly different approach to the risk. It's about that management of the company. It's about the input that our members have as board members, but not necessarily the direct risk like we would have of delivering a particular service. But in terms of going forwards, that should be in the reports that come to you from the company. So you will see their risk registers and have an opportunity to comment on them.
Okay, so if I can just give an example, and I'm not saying it's in any danger of, if Colchester Borough Homes were to fail and no longer be a viable business, it would no longer be able to deliver one of the council's strategic service objectives, which is social housing. So how does that risk of the commercial organisation failing not make it onto the council's strategic risk register?
The risk of the commercial organisation failing is a council risk, but the actual delivery of the service itself, the wording of that risk on, for example, CBH's risk register will be slightly different. As I know you're a board member for CBH, so you would know how their risks are set out, but the risk for CBH is very much about the survival of their service and their business. For us, the risk is very much about how we deliver that service strategically for our residents and the impact it has on our own organisation, because the risk for us is wider. So for CBH, the risk is they can't operate anymore, and that's the business closes. For us as an organisation, if CBH aren't able to operate, the impact on us is much wider. So the risk is it's different, it's probably greater, because not only can we not provide that housing, it takes away resources from other service areas and the impact that would have on us. So the wording would be slightly different for us.
Thank you, Hayley. I'm going to bring the Chief Exec in, then the Leader of the Council, and then we'll wrap up. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So Councillor Smithson, I think, raises a really interesting point that I'm going to give a lot more serious thought to. So I think there are two issues. First of all, I think what Hayley's talking about is a set of contingent risks for the council. And I think there's a really strong argument to include those contingent risks. And I think the argument is even stronger because of our philosophy now towards a family of Colchester companies, where the interdependence of one on the other is intrinsically bound up. So I think there's a really strong argument now for looking at this again, and I agree with everything Hayley's saying, but the environment's changed and our recognition of our interdependence is now heightened. So thank you for raising it.
Thank you. And I think what's coming out of tonight's meeting, and has been coming out of meetings of this committee over the last year or so, is that challenge and that, you know, that other pair of eyes looking at how we manage everything that is a risk within the council. And I think that's not a bad thing. Councillor King, I'm going to bring you in now and request that you be pithy, please.
That's a challenge. Is that pithy enough? I welcome the quality and feel of conversation here tonight. It's really helpful to have the contributions, and I'm in the same position as the Chief Exec. We're glancing each other across a crowded room. I'd want to follow up and talk through with Pam how we might pick this up. There's just 2 points that follow. First is that the family of organisations and the cultural and practical changes we want in those relationships, which take time, is underway. We absolutely should give that the prominence it deserves. We've been far too narrow in how we've looked at what we're here for. And this place, this committee, has been part of that. Well, let me leave it at that. And we'll take that away and have a look at how we might do that better. Oh, the side point, Chair, is when I meant to say this earlier, in finances, it's not enough, and it's a conversation Councillor Smith and I have had. It's not enough for us to just look at revenue and capital. We need to look at the sum of all liabilities and possibilities. I want us to look at HRA. We're not doing all we could do, in my view, to understand that, the limitations of government policy and change, for example, and what we can then go and do. So I'll stop there, but thank you very much, and I thank the committee for the quality of contribution.
Thank you. Before I just close with the recommendations, I just want to say that I always find it reassuring to go through Hayley's risk reports, because I know that she does hold feet to the fire. It's the one occasion that I think she relishes, where she gets that opportunity. So thank you for your comprehensive, not only report before us, but your responses to the queries and the comments that have been made this evening. Paragraph 2 asks us to consider, comment, etc., but also in 2.4 to endorse the submission of this report to Cabinet to approve the risk management strategy for 23-24. Are we all in agreement? Thank you very much. I think it's been a very, very useful evening. We just have the one item left then, and that is the work programme. And I'll just pass over to Matt to very briefly take us through that and see what we need to add or not add. I know that there is one thing that Matt and I were discussing before we started this evening about the timing of any financial considerations with either November or December meeting.
Thanks, Chair. Just a couple of points I'll make about the work programme that's in front of you. The 2022-23 quarter one revenue outturn is scheduled to come back in September. That's on the report. We are going to be scheduling another meeting in December, which the committee's requested. And what Councillor Pearson's alluded to is the committee originally requested that the monitoring officer's reports, so the suite of ethical governance policies, be pushed into the proposed December meeting of this committee, which would have the effect that those policies would then go on for recommendation to council in February, which is the budget meeting. So there are some workings out that we need to do around the timing of the different reports in November and December, but that work is ongoing. And the committee's requested 1, potentially 2 additional meetings be added. Just looking at the calendar, February is a potential month that could happen, as well as the additional meeting in December. So if you're happy, we'll go and look at that in some more detail, speak to relevant officers and see what we can fit in. Thank you.
Councillor Selleck.
Yes, 2 things. First of all, is the consideration on the 12th of September of the capital expenditure outturn and capital expenditure and review summary 22, is that where we're going to look at the capital programme review, and are we going to see proper appraisals and see the whole job then?
It's my understanding that is the case, Councillor Hughes.
So that's a tick. That's a tick.
I think it's highly unlikely, given my reference earlier to the long road ahead of us in terms of conducting the quality appraisals that I know will be important to you and others, that we will have all that done by the 12th of September. I think that's almost impossible. However, we will set out a commitment to do that and to deliver a roadmap that indicates various milestones.
Well, if we can see a sample of the work that's been done, I think that would be more useful than just having a roadmap and process. Yeah. If we could see a project or so we can, because at the moment, as I sit here, I have absolutely no idea how it's been approached. I really don't.
So an illustrative example of
if
what
we can have
an appraisal would look like.
Just a couple of examples. Something that we've achieved in the last year would be fantastic. And the second one, Chair, is we need to book a session where we have a substantive review of the numbers, nothing to do with the process, the numbers in the 2022 accounts. I've been begging for that for ever since March the 6th, when they came out at 11:30 in the evening. And we really do need to look at those figures and understand what they mean. So I'd really beg that we could, in September or sometime fairly soon, we need to concentrate on those and go through them properly and not get diverted into audit and everything else. There are accounts, and we should know what's in them and understand them.
Okay, I think that's it's a valid point. Perhaps if Matt, you and I and Andrew could have a look at the agenda timetable and see whether or not we couldn't, if we're not going to have the capital review ready, maybe we could slot something in as a Part B item.
It would be difficult to bring the accounts to sort of, but we'll certainly discuss it with the first opportunity to get this from the committee.
Sorry, to come back, we can use what we've got now, particularly as a Part B item. We can use what we've got now. We're not sweating you to produce your final judgment on it. We've got a set of draft accounts, and I just think it'd be incredibly useful to go through them and understand where we think the gremlins are.
Andrew?
I'm at the committee's, it's for the committee to decide, but I would contend that probably a complete set of accounts would be a better use of the committee's time than a partial set of accounts.
Okay, leave that with me to go away and have a chat about the pros and cons with Andrew.
Just to say again, I'd be very happy to go through what we've got now, and it might be more practical use to do that, because it leaves you with not having to have made all your judgments by then and being able to take a little bit of feedback. So there's half a dozen notes that are not complete. The rest of it's got some numbers in. They don't all tie up. It's a bit untidy, but I think it's quite ready for discussion and scrutiny.
Okay, William, I hear what you're saying. Anything else, Matt, in terms of the work programme? So I think also what Matt and I are having a brief discussion about, those of us, and it's most of us around the table who were members of the committee in the last municipal year, will be aware that we had to squeeze a couple of meetings in January and March, if I remember rightly, plus another meeting that hopefully we don't have to squeeze in next year, or this municipal year rather. So we may well find that we're going to have to do that, or we probably are going to have to do that in 24, early 24. So I think we just need to be mindful of that. Reece, was there?
It's just a point around the September meeting. Obviously, we need to schedule in, I know capital expenditure might be coming off, but we've got to schedule in the auditor's update on the timetable. That's already got to go in. So we take one off, we add one, but I think September actually looks a little bit light. So I think we can add a couple more things.
Yeah, so I'll have a chat with Matthew and see if there's anything we could move or shift around a bit to ensure that that's a full agenda and we're creating enough space going forward to be able to pull in the things that we know are coming down the pipeline.
Sorry, there was just one other point. At the end of November, we've got CCHL's annual report, and then on the 16th of January, we've got CCHL's half-year performance report. Do we need both? And then I don't see a half-year report from CBH. So we're treating the two companies differently for some reason.
If you recall, we did decide that we didn't need to do twice yearly reviews of CBH because we haven't got the concerns about CBH that we do with CCHL. All right. Can we agree the work programme subject to tweaking that I'll review with officers between now and September publication? Yeah. Agreed. Thank you very much. I think that's everything. We didn't have any Part Bs, did we? No. Right, good. Thank you very much, one and all, for a detailed, challenging meeting. Have you seen something that I've missed?
There is a Part B.
There is a Part B. Oh, the extract of the minutes, which we have approved, we did approve at the beginning. Does anybody feel the need to look at them in a confidential session?
Have to approve the confidential minutes as well.
Right, thank you. If that's the case, we're happy to. Can I take that as read? Yeah, we don't need to go into confidential session to look at those. Fine. Thank you very much. And thanks for your contributions this evening. Good night, one and all.